Well, Ofer, thank you so much for coming back to the show. And we're going to talk about how the music charts and the music industry is manipulated and how certain genres of music are introduced into the culture and into society. And why don't you give us a little background on how you came about putting this presentation together?
Well, hi, Mike, and thanks for having me on your show once again. I think the last time was a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, in the summer of 22. And today what I wanted to present is a view on how songs are becoming or not becoming popular, and take a look at how the industry basically collected the data and decided what songs will be on top of the charts. And the reason for this is because you, in several of your presentations, not only discussed the Beatles story, but also the broader side of the music industry. And this is also related to some of the comments made in memoirs, which I'll get into in a second. And basically, when we were, buying records in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was great music, but we were, as music fans, were focusing on the music side. But obviously, there was also a business side. And the business side, what we know now, what we know today, is, well, if the music was great, I say that the business side was not that great. And I'll try to show my findings today so that the audience can see. And for many of us, I know for you and many other of your listeners, music was everything. We listened to the radio, we loved the songs that we hear. We went into the record stores and bought singles and albums of the bands and artists that we loved. But now in hindsight, we find that many of the things were not as the way that the industry presented them to us. And I want to just to very quickly mention or read a comment from the 2021 edition of the Memoirs of Billy Shears, on page 266. With the control held by the super elite over all large radio stations, they had full control over which songs would make the top 20 and how each would rank. They decided against making Penny Lane a #1 hit in the UK. And a little further down, in his later hits, referring to Billy, without that level of assistance, the elites directed the stations to spin his records enough times to make them #1 hits for the prescribed duration. Currently, with personalized music stations, the public has much more control over what they hear. With logarithms based on individual preferences, we can now make our own top 20. So this comment, really struck me and really opened up, the gates for doing some research outside of the book. And in today's presentation, we'll discuss a couple of aspects showing the type of manipulation that went on behind the scenes of the music business. And our point of view is of music fans and music consumers, but also of critical thinkers who are trying to analyze pieces of information about the industry and think about what we were presented with back in the day. Now, the title of my presentation is also taken from a famous Public Enemy song, which is called "Don't Believe the Hype." Now, the word hype actually has two meanings. The noun refers to an extravagant or intensive promotion or publicity. So this is one definition, which refers to the promotion of songs. But it also became known as hyping, which refers to the faking of record sales data, which is also something that happened in the music industry, and we'll talk about it today. And I will show examples of such a manipulation, and we can discuss it, of course. And that's basically it. And by the way, some of the sleeves in the presentation are from my singles collection, and I'm sure many of the listeners would recognize these songs. So that's basically it, and I'm ready to begin.
All right, slide number 2.
So the presentation has 2 parts. The first part, we will talk about measuring a song's popularity, but fixing the numbers. This is about the manipulation of the music charts. We'll have an overview of how the industry measured singles for popularity. Then we'll discuss the music business, the market's players and their interests, agendas, and pressures. Then we will talk about a very famous case, which is the Payola scandal. Then I'll have 2 stories of how the charts were rigged, songs by the Beatles and Engelbert Humperdinck, and then another case where the Sex Pistols were competing with a Rod Stewart single, and more stories of how the industry was trying to control the sale of singles. So this is part 1. Part 2 will discuss punk rock, which was a major genre of music in the 1970s. And in hindsight, I will try to present the case that punk rock was manufactured. And we will talk about the theory of manufactured musical genres, which is something that you mentioned in several of your presentations already. Then we will show the case in point how punk rock was manufactured. The next segment will be about the story of the Sex Pistols, which is the signature punk rock group. And finally, we will conclude with more punk icons and how the industry supported them. That's basically the features in this presentation.
Okay, very good. So I'll move to the next slide now, Ofer. Yes? Okay.
So we begin the presentation with part 1, which is measuring a song's popularity, but fixing the numbers. And I wanted to begin with some background on radio, because radio was and still is a major part of the measurement of popularity of songs. So we have a map of the USA, of course, on the right side. And ratings basically determine radio and television advertising rates. And ratings are the estimated audience size of a specific television or radio program. The USA is divided into 210 media markets based on each territory's population. For example, Greater New York is the #1 market simply because it has the most population compared with all other markets, which is 8.5 million. Los Angeles is second, Chicago is third. Rochester, New York, for example, is counted separately. It's the 76th market in terms of population. And Glendive in eastern Montana is the number 210 and the smallest final commercial market with only 5,000 people. Now, the reason I'm talking or presenting this is that people, everything will be understood once we go through the next slides, but radio audiences are very critical, used to be more critical in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, when we were talking about the manual age of calculating popularity of songs, and I'll explain it as we go along. And just to conclude this page, radio stations operate within a known area and compete with other local radio stations. So this is just a very, simple background on radio. And we can move on to the next slide. Now, the music business has, in my opinion, 5 major players. So the headline here says the music business, the market's players, and their interests and agendas. So we have 5 main players, which are artists, record companies, record stores, radio stations or networks, and their DJs and Arbitron. And let me just go very quickly discussing each of these players. So obviously artists, we're talking about singers, we're talking about groups or male or female artists. Many of them want to realize their artistic value and become successful. There are others who just want to become rich and famous, which is okay, I guess. The second player are the record companies. These are the entities which want to sell more records, make profits, and promote social agendas. And then we have the record stores, the retailers who want to sell music products, singles, albums, etc., and merchandising to make a profit. Obviously, we had lots of record stores in the manual period, before the digital period, because now music can be bought online, of course. But back in the day, before everything went digital, record stores were very important because this was the place where music fans can consume and buy their records. And there are two more players, which we'll see in the next slide. We have obviously the radio stations or radio networks and the program directors and DJs. So radio stations, they want to increase ratings, which would increase revenues and profits from advertisements. They're competing. There's competition from other radio stations. They wish to make listeners tune into the station for as long as possible, so the ratings would go up. Now, many radio stations' promotions are all about making audiences stay and continue to listen. Examples from the top 40 stations: we play 10 songs in a row and with no commercial interruptions. Or, although they are called top 40, they mostly play the top 20, so listener can hear the top tunes on repeat and more frequently. Now, this type of programming was very popular with the two main pop stations in New York, WHTZ, which is Z100, and WPLJ. I'm going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, of course. So radio stations, again, and we will see it later in this presentation, are a major force, or used to be a major force, in order to calculate a song popularity. And finally, the fifth and final player is Arbitron. Now they're called Nielsen Audio because Nielsen bought them. Arbitron measures radio stations' rating across the USA. For many years, Arbitron selected random listeners and paid them a small amount of money to report on their listening habits. The chosen listeners fill diaries with what they listened to and for how long. In 2007, the company introduced portable people meter. Such meters digitally track what people listen to. So that's just basic, some basic information about the players in the music industry.
No, very good, Ofer. Want me to move to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the connection between record companies and radio stations. So in the early days of American radio, there was a clear connection between the two industries. As RCA, the pioneer in the recorded music business, formed NBC, which was the first network of radio stations across the USA. So we already see a record company which records and promotes artists, also forming the network of first radio stations across the USA. However, the radio industry was regulated through the formation of the FCC, and competing networks to NBC, such as CBS and ABC, were allowed to operate. In addition, during the post-World War II era, those three networks switched their focus to the television business, which was deemed and in fact was more lucrative in terms of ads or income from advertising. And other radio networks, such as local stations, began to operate. So we see that more and more radio stations are joining the market. And one final comment about radio: prime time in television refers to the 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock hours every day or every evening. In radio, prime time equals drive time. The two daily periods when audiences listen to the radio the most are the morning and evening rush hours, when people are in their cars, which is 6:30 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 7 p.m. on weekdays. So this is just a little bit about background about the connection between the record industry and radio stations. Now, let's move to talk about the measurement of music consumption. So we were listening to music on radio, and we were buying singles and albums in the stores. And we'll see in a second how that translated into the measurement of music consumption. But we have to go a little bit back and begin with sheet music, which basically was the very first method by which audiences could buy music, a music-related item of tunes they heard in the theater or on the radio. And we're going back to the beginning of the millennium, not this millennium, the other former millennium. In 1913, Billboard magazine, which was established in 1894, started to print the first ever best-selling sheet music chart called Last Week's 10 Bestsellers among the popular songs. So they were getting reports from music stores selling sheet music to determine which was the most popular sheet music sold, or which was the most popular tune that people were buying in the stores. This is before, of course, the record period or the vinyl period, which we'll get to in a second. So moving into the sound recording era, jukeboxes became popular in the 1940s, especially in the 50s and the 60s. It was one of the earliest ways the public paid to hear a song. And Billboard managed to measure it and published a record chart measuring jukebox plays during the 1950s. Now we go into measuring music consumption phase 2. In the post-World War II era, in the late 1940s, the music industry saw several dramatic changes, among them the creation of the pop market or the pop business. Some of those changes included the introduction of new vinyl formats, which is the 7-inch single and the 33-inch LP, both formats replacing the 78-inch format. We saw the growth of record stores selling the new vinyl formats to the masses, the initiation of the top 40 radio format. Many radio stations across the USA adopted this format, which stands for popular music. And then we have the measurement of singles and albums popularity through music charts beginning, and the introduction of new genres of music, such as rock and roll, and artists to promote social agendas, and the need for record companies to recoup their investments. So all of these changes are post-World War II, late 40s, early 50s, and we're now in a totally different era for music and music consumption. Now, there are basically two known systems of measurement. The rest of the world, I'm talking about South America, Europe, Australia, of course. We're talking about sales only. So whatever people buy in the stores accumulates every week and is shown in a popularity chart, which basically is the music chart. But in the USA, from the very beginning, there was another system which combined sales in stores and radio airplay. So songs received points not only from sales in stores, but also from how many times they were played on the top 40 radio stations. So here's a little bit about the music industry in the post-World War II era. And I'm reading from the top of the page. In outside of US territories, which compile weekly data based on sales only, record companies try to manipulate sales figures in various ways. And we will show and discuss some examples later in this presentation. In the USA, compiling weekly data began as early as the 1930s by Billboard magazine. But in 1955, a new version of the chart was created to reflect the new era. So on November 12th of 1955, we have the first weekly, the top 100 chart being introduced. And the chart blended data from 3 separate charts that were already published, which were the best sellers in stores, most played by jockeys, radio play, airplay, and most played in jukeboxes. So these 3, and sheet music was already taken out because it was no longer considered to be a major place where people consume their music. So we have a blend for the first time in November of 1955 of three separate charts, sales in stores, radio airplay, and jukeboxes. On August 4th, 1958, so 3 years later, after dropping the jukebox chart, Billboard renamed the chart the Hot 100, now consisting of sales in stores data combined with radio airplay. Now, collecting the data back in the 50s and 60s was done by phoning record stores all across the USA and getting data from shop owners. They would run diaries, notebooks, to detail sales for two purposes: running their inventory as well as summing up weekly sales and reporting them to Billboard, the music magazine. Cashiers were not digital back then, so all purchases were written down with all information into notebooks. Now, I don't know, Mike, if you recall, just before you go into the next slide, when you went to record store to buy a single on an album, and the cashier was printing the dollar amount, it was also, they had these huge notebooks. I don't know if you recall that, but I remember that vividly, and they will literally write down every copy of every single and every album that somebody purchased. And then they would, every week, they would calculate by hand the total sales for each single in each album and then report them. I know this is very strange today for people to, but this was how it was done. And I remember that for buying singles in Miami and also in New York later. And this is what the cashiers had to do. And again, for two purposes: for knowing their inventory at all times, and also for reporting to Billboard.
Now that you're mentioning this, I do remember back, let's say the mid 60s, when I bought a record or a 45, the person behind the counter was jotting something down.
So I took notice of it because the cashiers were not digital. We will talk about it in a second, because this changed in the 1990s. But this was how everything was written down, and was calculated back in the day. Now, so all of the introduction I did about radio, now I want to make it more clear. Top 40 radio plays a big part. So the top 40 radio station also reported the most played songs to Billboard weekly. Airplay is how frequently or how many times a song is being played on a radio station. Songs that succeed usually appear on a radio station's playlist, as radio station needs to constantly take listener surveys in order to figure out which songs to play more, because they knew if they played the songs that listener requested, they would obviously increase the amount of listenership to the station. Now, before the digital era, stations managers wrote the number of plays each song received. Then they reported such information to Billboard every week. As songs needed to accumulate points from both sales action and radio airplay, Billboard kept shifting the ratios between the two factors. So it was not always 50-50. They changed it all the time due to popularity or other factors, which I don't know, I couldn't find information about. However, radio was always a key factor in a song's success or failure, at least until the streaming period began. Now, just one side note, which I found very interesting. Sometimes record companies would issue double A-side singles. So how did they chart? So interestingly enough, singles that were promoted as double A-side singles or double A-sides, due to record companies wishing to give music fans some extra value for the purchase, ended up charting separately in the USA. The difference is the amount of airplay on each side of the single collected. So let me just explain it before I give the example. Mike, as you know, most of the singles we bought, and most of the singles, they had an A side, which is was the main song that the record companies were trying to promote, and then a B side, which is a song which was not that important, or they didn't want to promote it. But there were exceptions with the release of double A sides. For example, this single by the Beatles, by the way, many of the Beatles singles in the USA were released as double A sides. Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby. You see both titles on the sleeve of the single, and not only one of them. And I keep reading on the top, on the bottom of this page. The Beatles' double A-side single, Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby, charted separately. Yellow Submarine reached number 2, while Rigby reached only number 11. The difference was due to Yellow Submarine collecting more radio airplays. This policy ended on November 1969, when Billboard decided the double A-sides would from now on be listed together on the charts. So this was interesting. I mean, radio stations played the Yellow Submarine more. So it received more points and reached a higher rank on the Billboard chart than Eleanor Rigby, although they were sold as one single. So I thought this was interesting.
This is interesting because you would think that Eleanor Rigby, which is a much better song, would have been more listened to, and here we have the more childlike song, Yellow Submarine, taking the top spot.
I agree, but that's what we have in the record books. Yellow Submarine reaching number 2, and Eleanor Rigby reaching number 11. And the difference again, radio airplay. Now, music industry pressures led to illegal fixes. So in the USA, due to the system of compiling figures from sales in stores, as well as the amount of radio airplay songs were gathering, and due to record managers being pressured to recoup their investments in artists, this happened. Music managers used to offer stations kickbacks or freebies, which were in fact bribes. The deal was, play a specific song more often, and I, the record company's manager, will compensate you directly without anyone knowing. And I will show examples of cases that were actually publicized about this wrongdoing. Now, once this illegal exchange took place, certain records gained a lot more airplay, and that caused those songs to advance in their chart positions. The illegal base exposure led them to enjoy a perceived popularity, and I will explain that in a second. And all of this took place regardless of the quality of the song. So if a song is being played more on the radio, and we the audiences don't know it, but some of these DJs or station managers received money in order to promote it more, it gains more points, and then we see it climbing the chart. And if you were listening, or people who were listening to American Top 40, the syndicated radio chart show back in the day, or to other chart shows, and they see that the song is a top 10 or top 5, they see it that it became very popular. So this is a perceived popularity, because now they say, oh, this is a very popular, maybe I should go and buy it in the store. So this is like perceived popularity, which is, what I mean is it's not necessarily the real popularity of the song, because the airplay was hyped. And we will discuss it in the next slides. More illegal fixes until the switch into digital. So we were still in the manual and not the digital era. Now, all that has changed when the industry moved from manual to digital reporting. In 1987, Billboard became a subsidiary of media conglomerate BPI Communications. Around the same time, BPI acquired Broadcast Data Systems, BDS, which invented a computerized radio airplay monitoring system. An encoded audio fingerprint made tracking songs airplay easy. Based on Arbitron data, the calculation then was each play of a song multiplied by the number of listeners at the time of play. So the ranking of songs was based on such calculation, resulting in the total impressions of the songs played. So now we have a digital system, a digital tracking system, which supposedly is more regulated, is more real, although obviously, there could be also wrongdoings about that, but it's very advanced since the system in the manual time frame. The switch to digital is now complete. So in 1991, the record industry completed the switch to digital monitoring, with Billboard starting to use SoundScan. Thus began the video SoundScan era, or the digital phase of the music industry. So we already have the radio digital tracking, and now we have SoundScan, which basically, keep reading the next paragraph, the new point of sales technology was introduced, enabling digital scan of every record sold. So retailers were serviced with POS cash registers, and from then on, each item sold could be properly accounted for, significantly reducing errors and inaccuracies. So if you go to a cashier, you would see the store manager or the person holding a scan and scanning the barcode on the single on the record. So this began in 1991. Further and more recent developments, streaming, YouTube music videos will not be discussed here, as they are not the main concern of this presentation. We will mainly deal with the pre-digital era or the manual era. And finally, Memoirs commented that controlling the music industry's numbers was easier before the switch to digital. So let's go back and revisit the manual time period and check this claim. Going back to the manual time period. So before digital, there was manual, with lots of opportunities for the industry players to control the numbers and advance certain artists and songs. The most famous music industry bribe case was the American Payola scandal, but we will also mention two other publicized cases of fixings in the UK, cases that we have the sources for and ones which most probably did take place. There have probably been more cases of pay for play in the music market, but since we don't have information or solid information, we will only discuss the publicized cases, and we can all think about the ramifications of these cases on the music industry and of us as consumers. So let's discuss the Payola scandal. In the music industry, Payola is an illegal practice of paying a commercial radio station to play a song without the station disclosing the payment. So the rule is simple. If you disclose the payment, just as radio stations do for advertising, then all is fair and legal. But if a station or a DJ were paid to advance a song's airplay and did not disclose receiving such payment to their audiences, then such action is illegal. If there is no disclosure, the FCC deems such action as a violation of the sponsorship identification rules. And I know that you were listening to radio station. Many of your listeners used to listen to music on radio back in the day. Before you go into a commercial, the DJ would say we're going to a commercial, or there would be a jingle saying we're going to a commercial, because they had to do it. But there was never a case where a DJ would disclose being paid to promote the song, obviously, and because this was simply illegal in terms of the FCC regulations. The Payola scandal, let's talk about what took place. So from Wikipedia, before the 1950s, 8 agencies that funded NBC's TV and radio shows, such as Your Hit Parade, refused to reveal how they calculated the song's popularity. Early attempts to stop Payola were met by silence from the publishers, implying that the control system was already in place in the early days. Now let me explain that. This paragraph. There was a radio show and then a television show called Your Hit Parade, where artists were invited to sing those songs. But we, the public, did not know why these artists, were invited. And obviously they had either the interest of the people who wanted to promote them. And we recall that RCA started NBC, and NBC, which was the first network, they had this show, Your Hit Parade. And again, this is from Wikipedia. Early attempts to stop Payola were met by silence from the publishers. So we don't know, again, we saw, if someone was watching this, was listening to this show on radio or watching this show on television. We didn't know why these artists, were there, but obviously they were there because somebody wanted them to be there. That's my point. In the 1950s, independent record companies or music publishers frequently used Payola to promote rock and roll songs on American radio. Phil Lynn from Chicago's radio station WAIT disclosed in a congressional hearing that he received $22,000 to play a song. Again, everything that's in my presentation was stuff that we have the sources to. The congressional investigations and hearings on Payola began in 1959. As a result, radio DJs were prohibited from making any decisions as to what to play, and such responsibility was handed over to program directors. Now they became the ones to try and bribe. Record labels they then found a loophole in the FCC regulations and started hiring independent third parties, leaving them to pay and plug their records. And this illegal operation, according to Wikipedia, stopped only in 1986. So we see in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and all the way through the mid-80s that something was going on, at least on some of the songs that were promoted illegally.
So, Ofer, the $22,000 was not paid to the radio station, it was paid directly to the DJ?
Yes. And then the FCC caught that. And after the hearings, and they issued new rules, and they made the program directors in charge. But now program directors were the one that record companies were wooing in order to promote some of the songs. As I mentioned here in the last paragraph, again, this is from Wikipedia, there were a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So if you or I or any of our listeners were listening to radio songs in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there's a chance that some of these songs were not aired due to their quality or to their popularity, but because somebody was, being paid to promote them and to play them more.
Very interesting.
And the FCC investigated it and continued to investigate it and issuing new rules. But we see that this continued all the way up to the mid-80s, which is amazing. Now, let's talk about the Payola scandal. Actually, it's the story of two very famous people, two legends. The 1950s Payola scandal is also remembered as the story of two very famous music industry legends, Alan Freed and Dick Clark. Both were involved in the scandal, but when the investigations into their operations were finished, Freed and Clark witnessed a very different outcome. So let's talk about Alan Freed first. Born 1921 and he died in 1965. He was a very famous radio disc jockey. He began in Ohio in the early 50s, playing mostly R&B and rock and roll records. In fact, I think that he's the guy that is credited for naming R&B records as rock and roll records for the first time. At the same time, he promoted dances and concerts featuring artists that he played on the radio. So he was basically, holding the stick from both ends. He was airing artists and songs on his radio shows, which were very popular. And then he was also promoting the same artist in concerts. He was a promoter and a manager. Now, in 1954, he moved to New York and had a show on WINS, 1010 AM, which was back then the pop rock station until 1965. Since then, it became a very famous all news station, I think, up until today. He also managed concerts with artists he played on his shows. And he later had radio programs on other New York stations.
So he was a big-time player.
Yes. And he was at the center of Payola. You see on the top right side a first page from the Sunday News. WABC fires Alan Freed in the Payola probe. On the left side we see his gravestone. And in 1958 and 1959, he worked for a year and a half at WABC in New York, which is a very popular radio station, but he was fired after refusing to sign a statement for the FCC that he had never accepted Payola bribes. In 1960, Payola was made illegal in the USA by the FCC. In December of 1962, after being charged with multiple counts of commercial bribery, Fried pled guilty to 2 counts of bribery. He was fined $300 and received a suspended sentence. And in 1964, he was indicted by a federal grand jury for tax evasion and was fined $38,000 in taxes on income he allegedly did not report. Most of that income was said to come out of Payola sources. He died in 1965 at the age of 43 due to health complications caused by alcoholism. So Alan Freed was the first, or one of the 2, I think, most famous people that was at the center of Payola.
It's interesting. I didn't know he died at such a young age.
Yes, maybe some of our older listeners remember him, but he was, a big star back in the day. Very famous DJ.
Yeah, he was.
And then we have Dick Clark, which I think many of the listeners here know. We see on the top left corner a headline from one of the newspaper, DJ Clark wanted a Payola probe. So Dick Clark, born 1929 and he died 12 years ago, 2012, was the other famous person to be linked to the Payola scandal of the late 1950s, but he managed to come out of it with no charges. Clark was an American TV and radio personality who was mostly famous for hosting ABC Network's American Bandstand for 33 years, from 1956 to 1989. This show gave many artists their first ever exposure to national audiences and introduced rock and roll to teenagers and their parents as well. Now, Clark also owned, and I put an exclamation mark, 2 radio stations in California, in addition to his several announcements, duties on radio and television. When Payola investigations began in 1960, Clark was checked for his involvement in the scandal. His personal investments in music publishing and recording companies was considered a conflict of interest. So he sold his shares in those companies and was never charged. So unlike Alan Freed, he basically just got rid of some of his businesses and remained in television and in radio. I think the American audience is also known for the New Year's Eve show from New York, with the ball dropping down. And he was a very famous television producer, but I think his main show is American Bandstand, which I don't know if you watched as a kid, but it was quite popular on television, on American television.
Yeah, I used to watch it as a kid, but even Alan Freed pretty much got a slap on the wrist, considering what he was involved in. Yeah.
Now we move from the USA to the UK, and I want to mention a couple of chart fixes or two publicized stories of alleged chart fixes in the UK. So let me just briefly give an overview of the record charts in the UK. Record charts in the UK began in 1952, compiled by a weekly magazine, New Musical Express. Then there was a second music magazine, a weekly, Record Mirror, a rival music magazine, which started compiling its pop charts in 1955. Rival publications, Melody Maker in 56 and Disc in 1958 began printing their charts as well. In 1960, Record Retailer, a fifth newspaper, began printing its pop sales chart, which has been the official chart of the UK music industry ever since. Record Mirror stopped compiling its own chart and started printing Record Retailer's chart instead. So I don't want the audience to be confused. Let's just say there was a major industry chart, which was the Record Retailer, and then there were other alternative music charts. And the reason Record Retailer became the main chart was it was reported that Record Retailer had no affiliation with record companies, and therefore was less hyped than the other two charts, which was Enemies and Melody Makers. Until February of 1969, when the British Music Research Bureau, the BMRB, was established, no official UK chart existed. So there were all kinds of music charts in the papers. Now, Record Retailer and the BBC commissioned BMRB to compile the official chart, which began in 1969. So from 1969, we have one official chart, the one that the BBC is using. And before that, we have all kinds of music charts. But the industry still uses the record retailer from 1969 and backwards. So those of us, I have several of the UK chart books, and it's all the way record retailer. So this is how they could compile, and I'm going to read the last paragraph on this page. Each week, 250 record stores were randomly selected out of a pool of 6,000 nationwide to prevent fixes in the numbers. The stores chosen were not notified in advance to avoid fixes. However, there are two cases where we have sources alluding to possible tampering with the chart figures, and I will show them next. So case number one is something we discussed before, Mike, and this is also mentioned in memoirs. And this is the case of the Beatles competing with Engelbert Humperdinck for number one. So on the left side, you have the single, the double A-side single with Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. And then on the right side, you have Engelbert Humperdinck with Release Me. So in March of 1967, the Beatles entered the UK charts with the double A-side single Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. For the first 3 weeks of March, the Beatles single stalled at number 2 and never went to number 1 behind Engelbert Humperdinck's song Release Me. So for the first time, after 11 consecutive number 1 singles on the UK charts, the Beatles failed to reach number 1 with a single containing 2 of their classic songs. After failing to reach number 1, the Beatles had 6 more singles reaching number 1 in the UK. So this was a very, very odd case. I could never figure it out. But then we have memoirs. So for many years, it was not known what happened with Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. But in the memoirs of Billy Shear's book, the story is mentioned with an explanation that stalling the single was done on purpose to show the new version of the group with Billy that there is no guarantee for their further success and that they need to keep working and release music. So the Beatles, they entered, I think, at number 5. Then there were 3 weeks stalling at number 2, while Engelbert Humperdinck was still number 1. And then the single began to drop. So Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever never made number 1 in the UK. And what's implied in memoirs is the enormous help that the Beatles received from behind the scenes with the chart positions in music. They had 17 UK number 1s between 1963 and 1970. But we see that such a control can also most probably worked against them in the case of Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, the single. Next slide. Okay, then we're jumping to 1977, late May and early June, with 2 singles competing for number 1. We have God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, which I'll explain and talk about in a second. And on the right side, we have a double A-side single from Rod Stewart, I Don't Want to Talk About It. And the first cut is The Deepest, which is a cover of a famous Cat Stevens song. Now, before I dive into this, Mike, can you go back just for a second? I'm sorry. I have something interesting to to show you and the audience on the Rod Stewart cover. Notice something interesting on the Rod Stewart singles cover. He is shushing. You see, he's holding the Be Quiet sign on his mouth.
Yeah, the Masonic tell no secrets.
I have a multiple choice question for you in the audience, Mike. 1, is he giving us this sign in relation to the song's lyrics? I don't want to talk about it. How you broke my heart. Option 2, is he telling us that the big scandal is about to happen with this competition with the Sex Pistols single? Number 3, is he giving us the tell no secret sign, letting us know that he is in the club? And number 4, all of the above.
Could be all of the above.
Well, obviously, I'm joking. Something to think about. By the way, Rod Stewart was knighted in 2016 when he became a sir. But let's go back and talk about the very strange manipulation on these 2 songs and how they competed. So in May of 1977, the UK celebrated Queen Elizabeth's Elizabeth 25th reign, which was called the Silver Jubilee. She was knighted in 1952, so 25 years later, the UK celebrated the Silver Jubilee. Now, the punk rock group, the Sex Pistols, released their single God Save the Queen, protesting the Queen's reign. The song's lyrics were very provocative. Not only was the title of the song similar to the British national anthem, but the lyrics were harsh, calling the monarchy a fascist regime. The single's cover used the defaced Queen's face, covered with the song and band's titles, so to also cause controversy. The song was immediately banned by the BBC and most other UK radio stations due to its treasonous sentiments. But once the media reported such a ban, and we will see examples on the newspapers reporting on it in a second, the public went and bought lots of copies of the single. Now, the single reached #1 in the non-official New Musical Express chart, but only #2 in the official record, retailers, and BBC chart. This led to accusations that the hidden hand kept the song at #2, behind the Rod Stewart single, not to offend and shame the monarchy and the Queen. The industry reported on the week ending with the single, reaching #2, that it sold 150,000 copies, which is a lot, which on every other week would guarantee it a #1.
It's classic controlled conflict to create demand for the recording.
Yeah.
And to push what you're going to talk about in a little bit about the agenda behind the punk movement.
Yes. So I apologize for the quality of these images, but we have two headlines from the UK press on the week of the release of God Save the Queen. I think it was the second week because the song entered at #11 and then moved to #2, but never made #1. So on the left side, we see a headline which states Sex Pistols straight in singles charts at #11. This was on the first week, but the main headline is BBC plays TV and radio ban on the new single. So this is one headline, and on the right side, we see a report in the press that as of Friday noon, 5 days sales of Sex Pistols single, 150,000 copies sold, now total blackout. IBA advises don't play the single, and we see a photo of the Sex Pistols on stage. So this was in the media at the time of the Jubilee, and for audiences to go and buy the records, because obviously they couldn't hear it on the radio and not see it on Top of the Pops or any of the other music programs on television.
This is classic Streisand effect. So on the right it says the IBA advises don't play the single. What's going to happen? People are going to read that headline, especially the young people, and the first thing they're going to do is go buy and play that single.
Yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
Now, this is I'm showing you two versions of the cover. In the UK, I don't know how it was in the US, but when singles were released, there was sometimes more than one sleeve. So here we see the main sleeve on the left side, which I talked about earlier, the defaced face of the Queen. This is actually, I think, a picture from 1952 with the crown when she was knighted as the Queen. And you see the singles title God Save the Queen, the Sex Pistols. And on the right side, you see a different version of the sleeve. And then you see the pin on the mouth, which is a symbol of the punk movement, which we'll talk about in the second part of my presentation. And then you see on the right side, She Ain't No Human Being, which is a lyric, one of the pieces of lyric from the song. So controversy all over. And this was, if you people in the UK were going to record stores in late May and early June of 1977, this is what they found on the singles section. Now I want to talk about the more suspicions of fixes in the UK music scene. There were always rumors about more fixing and playing with the numbers in the UK charts. In 1978, for example, the Daily Mirror newspaper and the BBC nationwide television program were investigating the phenomenon called chart hyping, where record companies' representatives allegedly purchased records from chart return shops. If this was the case, sales figures of specific records were hyped, which advanced their chart positions accordingly. And I'll explain this paragraph in a second. I'm just reading the bottom part. In another 1980 documentary, A World in Action, more corruption was revealed in the UK music scene. Store chart returns dealers would frequently be offered bribes to falsify sales logs. So let me just explain briefly. When a record company services a record store or record stores all across the country, as also in the USA, or for that matter in any country, they're trying to guess how many copies would be sold, and obviously many singles and many albums are not being sold in full. So the record stores have to bring them back to the record company, okay? Because they have to make room in the stores for newer records, newer singles. So there's all kinds of inventory toying with the actual copies or how many copies were actually sold. So these two documentaries, which aired in the UK in 1978 and 1980, discussed how the connection between the record stores and the record companies were not all that, fine and legal, because some of the records were falsified. So again, this was done in order to hype the perceived popularity of songs for the public. More UK music fixes. We have this person, Dave McAleer, which is a well-known expert on the UK music chart scene. He has written or contributed to over 3 dozen music books about the chart history in the UK. Now, on his website, he writes about chart hyping, and he has this section which is called 50s and 60s UK charts, the truth. And he gives these examples. He's talking about two main methods that were employed, with the ablest architects of high being top managers. He's mentioning Andrew Oldham, which is the manager for the Rolling Stones, and Don Arden, which is the manager for Black Sabbath and Yellow, among other groups. And he writes that they would hire teams of young girls to visit as many chart shops as possible by taxi, buying as many copies of the particular record desired to enter the charts. So by doing that, by buying more copies, and this is reported obviously to the industry, charts begin to advance in the listings of the chart, and they begin to become more popular and perceived as popular. So this was a method used by some of the top-ranked music managers. Tony Calder, an associate of Oldham's, employed a second method for bribing a staff member of one of the chart shops to list a record with false sales. And finally, a third method was to get a friendly member of one of the music paper chart compiling teams to give false points to a particular title. So we're seeing that there are all kinds of methods of playing with the numbers, playing with the figures, in order to gain publicity, in order for the public to notice songs. Now, obviously, the Rolling Stones, ELO, and Black Sabbath, they had great songs. But this is just an example of how the industry or the record managers used to promote songs and to help them, to push them up in the listings.
And this is a small example of two pop managers that were doing this. God only knows how many were involved in this.
So again, this is the cases that I chose for this presentation are only things that were publicized, that we know about.
Okay, I'll move to the next slide for you.
So let's just sum up part one of the presentation. In the two biggest and most influential music markets, the USA and the UK, there were many attempts to control and rig the system of determining a song's popularity. Every factor considered for the popularity calculation, be it sales in stores or radio airplay, fell victim to an industry trying to control and shape public opinions and tastes. Several countermeasures were taken to try and fight this control, such as the Payola congressional hearings, but as we have shown in part one of this presentation, it is safe to say that fixes in the system took place all the time. This is not to say that there was no tremendous popular music in the manual tracking time period, but we will never know which records were honestly promoted and charted and which were not. It is possible that once the industry shifted by the early 1990s to a digitalized measurement of both radio, airplay, and sales in stores, the number of fixes was reduced. However, there are still ways to work around the numbers today, such as buying views on social media and other means. But this is, again, as you mentioned, Mike, this is a small sample of the cases that we know about, and we have no idea of knowing how many more cases were there.
Yeah, where there's money to be made, Ofer, as you know, there's going to be a lot of ambitious people trying to do things behind the scenes to make as much money as they possibly can. So with that, I guess we'll move over to part two?
Yeah. So in part two, I wanted to discuss how punk rock, the music genre, was manufactured. We'll examine how the punk rock genre entered the music scene in the mid-70s. We'll try to examine it through the story of its UK signature band, the Sex Pistols. And below you can see a cover of their only studio album, Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols. And we will examine more popular punk artists after that. Now, this is a brief overview that I prepared. This is something that you talked about in several of your presentations, Mike. So I'll just go through it and obviously just let us know your thoughts about this. The theory states that we're talking about the theory of manufactured musical genres. The theory states that many, if not all, popular musical genres were and are manufactured by the mainstream leading industry companies to make profits and promote social agendas. In memoirs, we are told that the Beatles were created to bring down Christianity. Also in memoirs, as well as in further outside research, other bands such as the Rolling Stones, we know that they were created to rival the Beatles, but were just another product of the same manufacturing musical line. Artists were bred, nurtured, or groomed by the industry, or if they started on independent labels, they were later bought by the big corporations. For example, Elvis recorded for Indie Sun Records at first, but then RCA bought his contract. Now, this part of the presentation discusses punk rock, which is only one music genre, but it is a genre which flourished in the mid to late 70s and examines information which supports the idea that it was another manufactured musical genre.
When you sent your presentation over, I was very glad to see that you were going to talk about punk rock, because to me that's the most obvious one to understand, being engineered and manufactured by the deep state.
So let's talk about punk rock as a case in point to manufacturing a musical genre. Social traits, we're talking about anti-establishment, rebelling against government, religion, parents, promotion of individual freedom, and do-it-yourself ethics. And by the way, when I read it, I immediately thought about Aleister Crowley's agenda, and we will talk about it in detail on the next slides. Presentation of new icons. This is similar to the introduction of Elvis in the 50s and the Beatles in the 1960s. We have groups and artists which define this genre. We have rude behavior, cursing on radio and TV appearances, and the punk fashion, tight pants, pins, accessories, shock-colored hairstyles. So this is just a brief background about punk rock and how it came about in the second part of the 1970s. Now, what musical traits? We're talking about songs that are very short and fast, under 2 minutes, and very loud, and songs with very rude lyrics. Now, on the right side, you see a copy of a sleeve of a cover of the LA punk band the Dickies, which record company A&M signed after dropping the Sex Pistols. And this single, which is called Banana Splits, which is a punk version of a children's song, it made the UK top 10 in 1979. This is just an example. The punk genre calls for some critical thinking. Question: why did established major and indie rock labels invest money and effort in creating an anti-establishment musical genre such as punk? Was there a social purpose, such as creating more social division, in addition to wanting to sell more records? And on the right side, we see the inside of the actual single, which was serviced to shops in colors. Obviously, the yellow color because it's all about a banana. But anyway, just going back to my question here. Now, I have nothing against criticism of governments, religion, and society, but here we have a case where we have a music genre which, for all purposes, called the youth to rebel and created social division in the UK in the beginning, and we will see examples of it in the next slides. Now, the story of the Sex Pistols. So the Sex Pistols were a very famous UK group from London. They were only active for 2.5 years between 1975 and 1978, and they became the punk signature band. Under the management of Malcolm McLaren, the band gained widespread attention from the British press after swearing, saying the F word live on the air on the Today Show in the UK in a December 1st, 1976 television interview. So the band promoted their first single, Anarchy, in the UK, and was invited to the show as a last-minute replacement, that's what we are told, for rock group Queen. As a result, the group was banned after they showed up and cursed live on air. They were banned by many clubs and concert halls. McLaren explained that the band's name is derived from the idea of a pistol, a pin-up, a young thing, and a better-looking assassin. And then he added, it's a band of kids who could be perceived as bad. Now we know that vocalist John Lydon received his name Johnny Rotten, and bassist John Simon Ritchie was named Sid Vicious. And on the right side, you see a very famous first page from the Daily Mirror, which is a very popular UK daily newspaper. And the headline, the day after they appeared on the Today Show, was The Filth and the Fury. And by the way, this became the title of there were 3 movies made about the Sex Pistols. And this was the title of the 3rd movie, The Filth and the Fury, showing the picture on the first page. And then there's a title, Uproar as Viewers Jam Phones. So the viewers were jamming the phones of the BBC, complaining that the Sex Pistols cursed live on air on the morning show. So this was the claim to fame. This show on television. On one hand, it got them banned by many clubs and concert halls, but on the other hand, they gained popularity with the public.
Again, it's contrived conflict, and it's being promoted by the media to stir the pot. Clearly, one way to go about this was to not report it at all, and the Sex Pistols would have just went away. The media was making a big deal out of it because they were supposed to make a big deal out of it, and to promote punk rock, the genre, and the agenda, the social engineering agenda that goes along with it.
And again, I apologize for the picture on the top right-hand side, but this is the condensed poster of the second Sex Pistols movie, which maybe some of the people here saw, Sid and Nancy, about Sid Vicious and Nancy. We'll talk about what happened there. And the 3rd movie I'll talk about in more detail in a second. So I'm reading now from Rolling Stone Rock Almanac, which is one of the books I have. So on June 18th, 1977, the same month that God Save the Queen was charting in the UK, knife-wielding hoodlums offended by the anti-monarchy single attacked the group's Johnny Rotten on the London street slashing his face and hands. The following day, the band's Paul Cook will be jumped by another gang of royalists and beaten with an iron pipe. So we already see all kinds of shenanigans and with this group. And I'm continuing to read. Johnny Rotten announced the band's breakup in a US concert on January 1978. The other three members still managed to record songs for the group's movie, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which we'll talk about in a second. On February 2nd, 1979, ex-band bassist Sid Vicious died at the age of 21 of a heroin overdose in his girlfriend's New York Greenwich Village apartment. At this time, he was charged with the murder of his former girlfriend, Nancy Spangen, in 1978. He was in and out of jails and detention centers, but his death left the murder case unresolved. In 1986, the film Sid and Nancy detailed their story. And finally, on February 26, 1979, in London, the Sex Pistols court case in which they and their manager, Malcolm McLaren, tried to divvy up the band's earnings so that the court case was running, it is revealed that only £30,000 are left of the band's £800,000 gross. So, and you'll understand in a second what happened there, because it is explained actually in the movie, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. But anyway, we see a lot of mayhem with this group. Now, another interesting thing about the Sex Pistols is the record labels. And I'm reading, although their active career lasted only 2.5 years, between mid-1975 to early 1978, the group managed to record on major and established record labels. The only studio album, Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, was recorded for Virgin in the UK and distributed by Warner Brothers in the USA. And this was in 1977. Their first single, Anarchy in the UK, was recorded and released by EMI, which we all know is the Beatles label and many other famous artists. So the first single was released by EMI in 1976. Later singles such as the Eddie Cochran song covers of Something Else and Come On Everybody were released on Liberty. This was in 1979. And in that same year, they covered a Monkey song called I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, and this single was released on the Call James label. Interesting fact, they also recorded a punk version of no less than Frank Sinatra's My Way, which appeared in their movie and movie soundtrack for Swindle. Final note, in a brief 2.5 years, they were dropped by and signed by 4 different record labels. But we see that some of these labels, such as EMI, Warner Brothers, and Virgin, of course, are major record labels.
It's amazing that all of these major record labels would be interested, especially when the band was just proving over and over again they were in self-destruct mode.
Yes. Now let's talk about this movie. I saw it in the cinemas in 1980. And of course, I didn't know what I know today. I was 15 back then. So, there was a lot of commotion. I mean, a movie about the Sex Pistols. And so we went to watch it in the cinemas. In 1980, a British mockumentary, or it was presented as a mockumentary movie called The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, came out, telling the brief history of the Sex Pistols and the manager Malcolm McLaren, born 1946, and he died in 2010. Singer and frontman of the band Johnny Lydon described the film as the vision of Malcolm McLaren, but having no shred of truth. The movie's plot is quite interesting, and pay attention now. McLaren is portrayed as the embezzler who created the band to manipulate them into the top of the music business, using them as puppets to further his agenda of cash from chaos. Sounds familiar, anyone? And we'll explain in a second. McLaren is shown as a crooked manager who also tried to claim the financial rewards the band received from the signed record contracts with the following music labels: EMI, A&M, Virgin, and Warner Brothers. In truth, the band was already formed when 2 of its members asked McLaren to manage them. However, does the film offer us more clues into the ins and outs of the record music industry back then? And let me just back up. So first of all, this movie was presented as a mockumentary, with mocking the Sex Pistols, but maybe, what we know now, they're showing us what they were doing. I mean, they had a manager which was embezzling the money, and it states that he was taking the approach of cash from chaos, which reminds us of order from chaos, which is Crowley's agenda. Now, what is cash from chaos? McLaren was actually saying, not only am I showing you that we're deceiving you, but I'm also going to make money from showing you this, because I'm going to make money. I made this movie to make money. So this is really, I mean, and obviously when I saw this film in cinemas in 1980, I had no idea. It was not a great movie by any means, but now, and this is, again, this is from Wikipedia and from other sources, this was the agenda. Cash from chaos. So we'll bring chaos, punk rock, and the Sex Pistols and everything that happened, but we'll also profit from it. So this is the story of the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, the movie about the Sex Pistols from the point of view of the manager. Now, I found this interesting comment also, Malcolm McLaren and his Crowley connections. This next excerpt is from a blogger called Torpedo the Ark. He posted this on December 1st in 2021, discussing Crowley's death day in 1947. Note, Malcolm McLaren, born a year before Crowley died, would also subscribe to this philosophy of spectacular failure and often mentioned the latter in conversation. Malcolm McLaren was very familiar with Crowley. We don't know more, of course, but McLaren also possessed a silver ring with the cult markings that the great beast, Aleister Crowley, had once owned. But he threw it into the ocean one day, having become convinced that it was bringing him bad luck. Or at least that this is what he told me when I asked him why he stopped wearing it. And this is an excerpt from a book, one of the biographies about Malcolm McLaren, which was issued in 2020. Now, I haven't read this biography, but I did manage to find this comment. And if you think about McLaren as being the promoter and manager of the Sex Pistols, cash from chaos, order from chaos, and we see now that Crowley was a big influence on him, it all ties up. And now let's talk about some other punk or top punk groups and the labels that sign them. And my point is that we see that major labels signed music groups, which many of you know, and promoted them. So we have the Ramones. I'm talking about now the USA-based, top punk artists. The Ramones, which were promoted and signed and promoted by Sire and Warner Brothers. Blondie on Chrysalis and EMI, the New York Dolls, Mercury Records, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, Elektra, Columbia, Virgin, Television on Capitol and Elektra and Ork, and the Patti Smith Group on Arista and Columbia. By the way, some of these groups, such as Blondie, they started as punk, but very quickly they switched to rock and disco. But most of these bands on this page, on this list, were considered at the time to be the top punk artists in the USA.
So I guess Cash from Chaos was a lucrative undertaking.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So for the UK, we have some of the top punk artists. Again, I'm talking about the late 70s and early 80s and the labels that signed them. We have the Stranglers, which were on United Artists, A&M, EMI, and Parlophone. The Boomtown Rats on Mulligan and signed, but also on Mercury and Columbia. Elvis Costello and the Attractions were on Radar F-Beat, distributed by Warner. Now, Elvis Costello started as a punk artist, but very quickly moved to other genres. Very talented artist, of course. Susie and the Banshees, also from the UK, Polydor, Geffen and Sanctuary, and The Clash, which recorded for CBS, Epic, and Sony Music. Now, some of these companies were the recording, and some did the promotion that was split, or the groups moved from one company to another. But again, we see that major punk groups from the USA and the UK were signed by the major labels. And to conclude part two, Major record labels signed many top US and UK punk bands during the 1970s. While such bands had varied degrees of success, it is interesting that established major record labels chose to invest in the genre, supporting anti-establishment and anti-government ideas. This calls for some critical thinking regarding the initiation of the punk genre and the real social agendas behind it. Was it a valid criticism of society, of governments, and of social systems? Or was it a planned out way to cause more friction in society while selling records? So it's an open question, but I think that some of the stuff that I presented makes us think that a lot of these things were manufactured and promoted on purpose, not only to make money, but also to social engineer the public.
Yes, absolutely, Ofer. I agree 100%. It's a great example of another genre of music and what it was in place to do. And I think he did a great job of pulling this together. And even going back to part one, how the entire music system is manipulated as far as record sales and being at the top of the charts and all of that. The whole thing is just manufactured. Well, folks, I have a great show, and Lou Calabrese is with me today. And Lou is a long-time listener, and he's also been in the music industry for a long time. Lou comments a lot on the content that I put up, and he was originally supposed to join us with the show that I did with Paul and Doug, but we had so many connection issues, and I promised Lou that we would catch up and get him to join me on the show and to talk about the music business a bit and his experiences. So, Lou, welcome.
Hey, Mike. How's it going? Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And like I said, Lou, I do appreciate all of your input on the YouTube channel and your comments. They're always very insightful. What got you interested in music? What sparked you to get into music?
It was when I was about 2 or 3 years old. My parents bought me my first Beatles album, the Beatles' second album, and I remember listening to that when I was probably about 3, I guess, around 3 years old, and that's pretty what got me started. That's what got me influenced from that. So from that, I grew as everybody else, like any other teenager, listening to rock and roll records, all the classics from the 60s and 70s. That's how I got into it. That was the initial introduction. My parents bought me the Beatles' second album.
I think that the Beatles' second album on Capitol, my personal opinion is that is probably one of the best Beatles albums from the early period. And I'm talking about even when I lay it up against the UK releases. That was a great album. And I'm probably going to get some comments where people are going to disagree. But like I always said, music is subjective. So that's my personal opinion about the Beatles' second album on Capitol in the U.S.
And being a 3-year-old, you're a lot more impressionable, having virgin ears to rock and roll music or records. That's like your first impression. I'm like, wow, it's like being weaned on Beatles, literally. That's basically how I got it. I didn't hear them on a radio and say, oh, Mom and Dad, I want that record. Buy me the record. It's like, they bought it and it was in a record player. There you go, little Lucci. Listen to that. By the way, that's my nickname, Lucci, since I grew up. I'm also known as Lucci Calabrese in the business, or ex-business.
Age 3, you got me beat, that's for sure. So then how did it progress from there? You had your teenage years growing up. Were you in bands? Were you doing recording? Were you thinking in terms of engineering in the music business? What were the teenage years like?
Well, the next step, introduction or influence was maybe fast forward a year or 2 later when I was about 5. My mom took me to our cousin's house in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. And my cousins were just a few years older than myself, but they had a band downstairs in their basement. And my cousin Johnny had this Ludwig Red Sparkle drum kit, and I was just blown away. I was like, wow, cool, real drums. And I'll never forget Red Sparkle. I just remember that for some reason. And my other cousin Neil, and the three of them had this band. I don't think I remember seeing them actually playing. Maybe they did. Being kids, they're probably if they're about 5 years older, they're probably about 10 or 11 years old. But that was my first introduction into being like in front of a real band, so to speak. You know, when you're a little kid, it's like, wow, real drums, cool. You know, it's a big deal when you're 5. But that was my introduction. And then growing up in New Jersey, outside Atlantic City, I was buying, you know, all the classic records and just loved listening to them. And I just would listen to them and just visualize the music. I was like just becoming infused with it, wanting to become a part of it. Well, my cousin gave me his old Gret kick and snare drum with a hi-hat and crash cymbal when I was 14. And I took that home to my Atlantic City home and just started playing drums to Beatle Records and all the others on a cheap stereo, just kick and snare and hi-hat. And that was when I was 14. A couple years later, I saw an ad in the paper for a 5-piece drum kit, Ludwig, and I asked my dad, please, I wanted this. Look, it's really cheap. And he called a friend of his, John Antonelli. He was a big drummer at my dad's old nightclub in Atlantic City, the Five Fire Club. But anyway, since I was just a kid, my dad says, wait a minute, let me call an old friend of mine. So since my dad was a manager, he knew all musicians that played there. So he calls his drummer, John Tonelli. I said, hey, can you take my kid, check this drum kit out if he wants to buy it? And sure, he took me. We drove over, saw the kit. He actually talked the guy down, saved me money. Remember, I got it for $250. This blue silk, brand new Ludwig 5-piece kit. And that got me into music as part of it, you know, being a drummer. That's all I wanted to be at the time. My influences were Keith Moon and Ginger Baker. They were my favorites. I loved to emulate. And then I would jam with high school friends, you know, they had guitars and basses, and they'd bring them over. We'd jam either in my bedroom or in my garage later on when I converted it into a little makeshift studio. And I did that for a few years until I was, in 1981, when I was 20. I wanted to be more than a drummer because I wasn't quite as serious or dedicated as a musician. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't really, I wanted to be more than that. So I bought a Tascam 4-track reel-to-reel. I think, was it the 3440? And long story short, I got the 4-track, and I bought, I got compressor, DBX compressor, and a couple little outboard gear things, minimal stuff, and some mics. Long story short, I invited my musician friends over after converting my garage into a studio, and just recorded them on 4-track, just drum kit, guitar, and bass. Lo and behold, it came out pretty cool. I didn't really know what I was doing other than reading books and from magazines. That was the only experience I had, just two-dimensional. But since I got to put things together, I was just learning as I go, so to speak. And that eventually got me into turning that into a whole studio. Over time, I worked as a parking garage attendant underground Atlantic City Convention Hall, made a lot of cash and a lot of tips, and invested all that money in recording equipment. Sometimes if I didn't have as much money, my dad was kind enough to loan me money, never asked me to pay him back, which was great dad to have for that support. But I eventually bought an 8-track Atari half-inch analog 8-track and a bi-amp 16 by 4 by 2 mixer and speakers, and, MXR outboard gear, a whole bunch of great microphones at the time, Sennheisers, AKGs, Sony, Shure, all the good ones. And I started recording. I just wanted to do it just for entertainment, just for my own satisfaction. But in the back of my mind, as I'm recording friends, I started getting a reputation, and their friends heard the tapes I was recording, and they would ask me to record them too. So I said, well, okay, if you want me to. It beats parking cars, so okay, sure, I'll do it for $15 an hour. I started recording local bands for a little bit, and then City Hall, some guy from City Hall, this inspector, showed up one day just laughing his butt off. I'm like, what's so funny? He just introduced himself. I'm so-and-so from City Hall, zoning ordinance officer. I'm like, what's that? And I got a lesson real quick that all this construction work I did with my own hands on the garage part, I had to tear it all down. It was a 1-car garage, A-frame, cinder block, and I took the roll-down door off and extended that front part just with a cinder block foundation and 2x8, lumber, and just did it myself with common sense. I extended it a couple feet longer, and that gave it more space. But the big thing that got me in trouble was I was doubling the size of the garage by adding by 10 by 12 foot drum booth, laid out in the grass. The foundation was cinder blocks. I just dug holes, put cinder blocks in, and just used common sense and did it real well and built, 2x4 walling and stuff. And long story short, I had the room virtually attached to the garage, and then I took a hammer and chisel and just knocked out the cinder blocks in the middle. Just enough not to make everything, the whole garage cave in on me.
Yeah.
But it stood, and I was getting that far. I'm like, great, now I have a drum booth so I can isolate the drums. Great, this is going great. And then that's when I got a lesson in zoning. But yeah, it was a zoning thing. So he ordered me to tear everything down, breaking my heart. And not only that, he said I had to cease and desist from using my garage other than, parking a car or storing paint cans. He said, you can't use it for your hobby. I'm like, what?
Why not?
That was the ordinance, the city ordinances. If you want to convert, you got to get, permits and apply to ask, all this, city hall zoning ordinance crap. Like, they're not going to let me do that because he said it's zoned just for, for storage or parking a car. And that was the basic. So I didn't give up. I thought right at the same time, that's when MXR came out on the market with their drum machine for $900. And I bought that. I'm like, okay, well, this solves the drum problem. I don't need a drum booth that I had to tear down. Now I'll just, program drums. So I learned how to do that and started doing tracking in my bedroom only, which was a converted control room. Before I had to tear the garage down, I had a snake cable, like 16 channels. I made all the cables from Radio Shack equipment, wires and connectors and stuff, and ran all these cables through a piece of plumbing tubes. It was sewage tube, this 4-inch black thing, but very flexible, made for sewage underground. But I'm like, well, it's great. I just needed to protect my cables, weather resistant. So I ran this real ugly thing out my second floor bedroom window into the garage window. And it created quite an eyesore. Neighbors would complain, like, what the hell is that thing? What the hell is he doing in there? What do you think I'm doing? That got me in trouble at City Hall, too, because they complained of eye issues.
So it sounds like one of your neighbors turned you in.
Well, one of them wasn't really friends with my dad, but I guess he just held a grudge because later on, I guess he found out that my dad was connected with the 500 Club in Atlantic City, which was known for its Italian subculture. Mentioned on the Sopranos and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
which
got
is
it.
true, but that's a whole nother story. So I didn't give up. It was the early 80s, and techno was just coming in the music scene, and I love techno music, Eurythmics, Giorgio Moroder, all the electronic drum stuff that was just coming out, pop music. So I adapted. I just adapted that when I was happy. I just wanted to record music. So I got the MXR drum machine. I do programming. A friend of mine introduced me to a friend of mine who ended up being my music partner for many years. And mainly I was using my studio for he and I to record our songs and demos. Well, it was basically his music. I would collaborate, but I was more a drum programmer, synth sound programmer for him to play keyboards on. And I acted as producer, engineer, all that stuff. And he was the singer, songwriter, guitar player, very talented, great voice, great rock and roll guitar player, great blazing lead solos, everything. And I said, hey, man, you want to record? And I'm like, yes. So we ended up recording together, just became a team, and that lasted for years. But in between that, I was recording local bands would come over to my house. They'd have their music, their song prearranged. They'd pay me to record them. And these were real bands. And, of course, I couldn't do real drums, so they would come over with their arrangement. And I'd sit down behind a drum machine, and I write down, on the paper, the arrangement they have, blah, 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 program it into the drum machine. And then once that's done, lay the drums down on tape, and then let the band do their overdubs, guitars and keyboards, and finally vocals, lead guitars and stuff. So that's how I acted at a virtual 8-track studio without having a live studio to record bands. But, let me emphasize, they came to me. I didn't ask them, and I was happy to do it because, sure, it would beat, parking cars at 20 degrees below zero in February, middle of winter. But
what were you charging, Lou?
At the time, $15 an hour. That included, tracking everything, tracking, mixing, cassette copy. Well, I think I did cassette copies like for free.
That's cheap. Wow.
15 an hour because that was my time, whether I was tracking or mixing.
Yeah, well, you were a deal. I was going to studios back then, workshop recording studios in Douglas and Queens in the early 80s. I think that was about 75 an hour, but it was 16 track.
Yeah, 16, yeah. Back then, 16 tracks a big difference compared to 8.
But the 8-track studio I was going to, Multisound in Queens, New York, the guy that ran it was a guy by the name of Dave Weiner. Dave was such a great guy, and I found out about a few months ago that he passed away 6 years ago. I couldn't believe it. Dave was a great guy. He was a great sound engineer. He had a great ear. He went to Juilliard, so his musical training was top notch. But I think he was charging for 8-track about $40 an hour. So, like I said, you were a deal.
But did he have a live room in addition to the control room? Like record real bands, live drums and amps and all that too?
He did.
See, I was limited on that. I didn't have a live room.
Oh, gotcha.
I could only do. See, so it's like, well, there's one arm cut off technically,
Yeah.
track-wise, so to speak. So that's a big deal. Yeah, if I had a live room, heck yeah, sure, I could have charged double too. But City Hall took care of that problem for me, conveniently.
$15 even without the live room for the work you were doing was a good deal.
I must have been doing pretty good because they kept coming back. It was like, okay, sure. And I got to know like 3 or 4 different bands, maybe 5 altogether, steady clients.
How did things progress with your music partner then? How long did that run? How did it go?
We first recorded his music with a couple other musicians, a drummer and bass player. So it was a trio when I still had my garage set up. That was in September 81. I did it on the 4-track. And then after I got my 8-track, like a year later, in 83, we recorded again since we had 8 tracks and recorded his music. And all I did was contribute just the engineering and just maybe some synth sounds. But everything else was his. I didn't give my input on it. It's just him and the drummer and bass player. Oh, but I did tell the drummer, I said, his name was Paul. I told him, hey man, play something linear like Terry Bozzio for Missing Persons. I thought that was really cool. I was into like a real techno phase, and I thought that linear playing was cool. So he did that to Keith's guitar work music, and then we recorded it. That was around May of 83. Fall of 83, that's when I first got in. My partner and I first became a collaborative team. I just did a drum track, and I just did some guitar chords on it and bass, just some grunge, punky sound thing with the 8th notes on the floor tom. Anyhow, I did that, all that, and all I had to do was come over and sing, and that was the first thing we did together. And he did this great rock, this English voice, we're just goofing off, but it worked. And then after that, we became a team, and I'd invite him over, and he was the writer, singer, guitar player, keyboard player. I programmed the drums. I programmed the synth sounds from the play. I did all the engineering, production work, and that's how we worked. We did that. We started doing that on a steady schedule from end of October 83 till I finally sold everything, which was probably spring of 87 before I moved to Hollywood, to Los Angeles. So for about 4 years we did it, and over that time we probably recorded, I remember he says, dude, we got like 100 songs here. Let's see, what we would do was his idea. He would take the same backtracks we did for one song and do a whole different melody on it, whole different harmonies. So that would count as a whole different song technically, even though it's got the same drum track and bass line and whatever. But, you can do variations like that when you write, when you know music. And then I decided, made the next move to finally want to go to Hollywood after that, or at least to professional studios.
And then you closed up shop, Lou, and then went out to the West Coast?
Exactly. Well, I had a little bit of motivation because other musicians had the itch to move out there too. A bass player and a drummer player, friend of mine, they wanted to move out too, had the same itch to move out there. They were serious musicians, very talented, and wanted to go the next step. And like, okay. So we kind of basically all moved out around the same time frame. So at least we all knew each other. We didn't know anybody out there, with the exception of one older musician named Sunny. She moved out a few years before we did. And she had one contact in the music business with Stanley Clark. She grew up with him from the Philadelphia neighborhood. That was the only professional contact we had. And she eventually hooked up my bass player friend with Stanley, and he became one of Stanley's proteges. Stanley would hook him up with gigs, and he became pretty successful doing tours with big artists, R&B artists. So he made a name for himself. When I moved out, at least I had some courage. At least I had a couple of buddies moving out there, so I wasn't quite alone. So that was, comforting a little bit, considering I'm moving 3,300 miles cross country, not knowing anybody, literally.
Now, did your music partner go out there with you or no?
No, he decided to get married and then have a baby. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? So he stayed back in Jersey, lived with his parents, in his parents' house. He had a huge house there outside Atlantic City. But I'm like, dude, I'm going. I'm taking our tapes. Okay, I got our tapes. When I connect, I'll give you a call, okay? Anyway, so that's when I moved. I still want to do it. I accomplished, in the back of my head, what, at least the first part of my big plan. At least, well, if I'm going, I need some demos to show this is what I do. And I had some demos. I bought a Sony Walkman, so if I ever run into an engineer, producer, I've got a Walkman on me. It's like, hey, we don't need a studio here. I got a Walkman. Just put the headphones on. Listen. I got there in the first week of July. My dad drove out with me. He got me some furniture, made sure I was set up because he couldn't believe what I was doing. He couldn't believe I sold all this stuff, pennies on a dollar, and going out cross country. He thought I was crazy, but I still had his support because I told him I had a plan. I got everything written down. I know what I want to do. I know where the studios are to do it. So it's just a matter of time. I'm knocking on doors. And if things don't turn out after a few months, I'll just get a regular Joe job like I had once in Atlantic City, as a mail clerk at a county office building for a year. So I don't care, whatever it takes,
Lou, was your plan to get the music sold, or was it more about moving toward doing sound engineering and possibly producing?
It was, I had to use the engineering part, to support the producing part. Since I'm nobody just walking into town can't say, hey, I'm Richie Calabrese. I'm the one to produce here. You just don't walk into Warner Brothers and say
right.
that, So I'm thinking practical, realistic. So I loved engineering, and that was my dream. I had, engineers I looked up to like Hugh Pagam. I had a list of studios. I figured, let me get my resume, and I'll be knocking on doors saying I just, looking for a job as an assistant engineer, because at least I know the roundabouts, all the basics of a studio. Whether it's 8-track or 48-track, the basics are still the same. It's just getting acquainted with the equipment. So I figured I had enough knowledge and experience to at least be an assistant. So I started knocking on doors. I had a list of all the studios from each section, from Glendale to North Hollywood to West Hollywood to Studio City. There's like many little studios there, suburbs, each all within driving distance of each other, very short distances. So my plan was to hit each area at a time. Like for this week, I'll hit all the studios in West Hollywood. Then next week, I'll go to Glendale Studios. Then the weekend, if things don't click, that was my plan. Just hitting each area at a time. I was just knocking on doors, but I wanted to. I figured, let me get in the door, so to speak, as an assistant engineer. So I figured once I'm inside the business, that gives me more room and options. That's more practical than wanting to start as a producer. So that's the way I did it, approached once I got out there.
What got your foot into the door of one of the studios out there? What happened?
Boy, fate and being at the right place at the right time, unexpectedly. One of those stories, believe it or not, I couldn't believe it, but that's what opened the door to my whole career, 20 years later. I was just getting frustrated after hitting a lot of studios, and they just take the resume and they, don't call us, we'll call you. So after a few weeks or a month, I was getting a little disappointed. So I figured, let me just get a regular crappy job for something so I have some spending money, and I'll still knock on doors. At least I have some income. So I'm on my way to a mailroom job on the freeway, and halfway there, a little voice in my head said, oh, geez, we didn't come out 3,300 miles just to work in a mailroom again. And this little voice in my head said, get off the freeway, make a U-turn, let's go get something to eat, and give out some more studios, give out some more resumes to some studios. I wasn't going to give up the fight. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm like motivating myself. And that's what I did. So I went home, picked up some KFC chicken. I'm looking in the Mix Magazine studio addresses, and I happened to miss Giorgio Moroder's studio right here in Studio City, which was practically around the corner from North Hollywood. And I had already hit those studios in that area. I don't know. There's just some reason I didn't hit Giorgio's studio when I hit all the Studio City locations. So I figured, all right, I'll take a resume over. It's around 5 in the afternoon, the end of the day. What the hell? I've got nothing else to do, nothing to lose. So I go over to Giorgio Moroder's studio in Studio City. I park in the back lot, knock on the back door, and one of his engineers answers the door, and very rude. And he goes, yeah, what do you want? And I'm real polite, explain myself. Hi, I'm Lou Calabrese. I had a studio. I moved out here to further my ambitions as a studio assistant, and I'm looking for work. And before I can hand him the resume, he just grabs it out of my hand like a jerk. And I'm thinking, what a jerk. Anyway, it's like I'm in no position to argue. Whatever. Keep a smile, Louis. And he's reading it, and all of a sudden he turns to a friendly guy, complete opposite. He goes, oh, you're from Atlantic City. Me too. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. Now you don't have to be such a dick. Okay. I didn't say that to him, but I'm like, phew. I wiped the sweat from my brow. Okay, well, that's all right. I didn't mind. Okay, that's cool. So he goes, well, come on in. He goes, I'll give you a quick tour, since we're home buds. And that was my introduction and my foot in the door, so to speak. He invites me in. It's a one-floor studio with 3 rooms. And he's taking me from room to room, from the main room, I walk in, and there's Keith Forsey, famous producer, Billy Idol, and Psychedelic Furs, and Simple Minds, all these great English bands. And I didn't bother. I'm like, oh, wow, cool. He's actually working on some Idol remix. Then my buddy takes me to the other room, and there's Ross Hogarth working on something for Giorgio, Studio 2. And then he go, okay, cool, nice. I don't say a word. And then he takes me out around, and then there's the reception people, Lori Howard, the studio manager, and George Nashke, Giorgio's music publisher, and Cecile, the receptionist. Oh, hi, how you doing? Yeah, nice to meet you. Okay, and then Dave goes, come on, go to the other room. And then he takes me in a smaller room, which was all Giorgio's synthesizer room, his writing room, with a small console, but all these Yamaha sound modules. I think they were TX-812s at the time. But yeah, I was like, cool, this is where Giorgio writes. I'm like, cool. Anyway, after he gives me the tour and we chat, he discovers we're old, hometown buddies, hometown people from the same place. He goes, I can't give you a job, but you're welcome to hang out. So I'm like, great. And so that night, I tell my dad, call him in Atlantic City, and my dad asks what the guy's name is. And I said, oh, come on. What are you going to tell me? You know him? Come on. And he goes, no, what's his name? I said, well, all right, Dave Concourse. My dad goes, ask me if he knows Mort or Eddie Concourse. Oh, come on. Come on. And tell me he knows them. My dad goes, no, just ask him. All right. I'm going tomorrow. I'll do it. So I go back tomorrow and ask Dave, when I had the moment to chat. I'm like, you don't know Mort or Eddie Concourse, do you? He goes, yeah, it's my dad and uncle. Why? Anyway, long story short, I can keep going on with more details. It's an entertaining story, but to the point was I found out, my dad tells me that he and his dad were best friends. And my buddy, he calls his dad in Utah to confirm all the stuff I'm telling him. He goes, yeah, that's Lutz. Yeah, we used to be friends, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Dave hangs up the phone, and he turns to me with a dead expression. He goes, my God, you mean I'm stuck with you now? And I said, well, yeah, like a hungry puppy. Yeah, you bet. If that's the way it's going to be, shit. Anywho, that was my introduction. And Dave got me, I think I had my first job at the studio was for Brian Wilson, booked a session coming in with his producer, that old psychiatrist. But they just needed someone to answer the phones and hang out, as an assistant if they need anything. I'm like, yeah, sure. And I got a real paycheck for that, just sitting there. That was my very first gig. Giorgio's, and I met Brian Wilson. He seemed real preoccupied, not really in touch with what he was doing. He seemed very distracted. That was my first job. The thing about Dave he was like a big brother because he used to be the head tech over at Westlake Audio Studios where Michael Jackson did his first 3 albums. Anyway, he knew everybody there. So he said, go see, I forget her name, go see so-and-so, tell her I sent you and have her set you up with a job interview. That's all I can do for you. So that's what happened. He set me up like anybody else. At least I had, I knew a name to ask for, and that got me an interview, and the head runner there interviewed me. He liked me. I got hired, and that was my first step into the business, as a technical engineer part, not producing, but like I said, I just want to at least be practical, get a job, at least if I'm doing something technical, at least I'm in the door. I can worry about doing my own thing later, one step at a time. So that's how I got into business. Within a couple of months, I'm working at Westlake as one of the gopher runners. And in between, we're invited to learn, technical stuff. And that's how I got started doing setup for the sessions. One of the techs showed me how to align the 2 tracks and the multi-tracks and, plug the multi-tracks in with all the harnesses and how to calibrate them. And, they taught me I got on-a-job experience. And that's how I became a tech. I'm like, great, now that I'm doing something functional, at least, I'm doing that. And then I got my tapes on the side for my partner and then I'll pursue that on the back burner. At least let me get some, a foothold in the bit inside. That's how that started. And then musically, my opportunity for a big break came when I was hanging out at George Moroder's studio. And I was in the main room, and there's my buddy Dave working with Keith Forsey, the producer, doing something. I don't know what they're working on. And then they took a break, and Keith turns to me and says, "So, anybody got any demos?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." So I run out, and he goes, "Go get it." So I run out to the car, bring it back, and he's listening to one of the demos I did with my music partner in Jersey. And he's getting into the beat of it, but the melody wasn't quite professional. We were only kids from Jersey, so, we weren't that experienced. Keith Forsey just takes the melody and he's singing over my partner's vocal on a cassette playing. It's like he's structuring the melody to be more, on the beat or more professional sounding. And he's doing it while he's snapping his fingers inches from my face. And I'm thinking to myself, holy crap. We worked that hard, and I'm finally here with a real producer who's giving me a chance to listen, and he's guiding me how to improve it, how to, bang it into shape, more professional pop sounding. Whoa! I'm thinking this to myself, this is great. So I called my partner and told him, told him what I'm doing. I'm like, dude, I'm getting there, man. This is Billy Idol's producer. So, I'm just hanging out, letting you know, calling in, just keeping in touch, how the war is going, so to speak. These are today's reports from the war, but just letting them know how, what things are going. Like, it's looking good. It's looking good. We're getting that much closer.
So was he still plugged in, Lou? What was your partner? What was his first name?
Same as Keith. Same name, Keith.
When you're giving him these updates now that you're out there, is he still plugged in, or is he more into the whole family thing?
He's doing a family thing, but if I click and I get this match to light, hey, man, you're only a plane flight away. So, he just stayed in Jersey, and then I'm still working on my own, trying to do whatever I can to get inside. And, I wanted to solidify, at least get some, at least as an assistant engineer or as a technical engineer. And then at the same time, while I'm in that, at least then I can focus on other connections or opportunities, music-wise and producing-wise, if they come about. And you only get those, just by hanging out. It's like, yeah, if you want to change, you just got to hang around, and eventually, you'll get called for something. Opportunity will call, and that's how breaks happen. So that was my thinking. I'm like, it's okay. So, it's okay. I'm meeting producers. I'm rubbing shoulders. I'm setting up their machines. At least I get to, see them. And, it's only a matter of time. Maybe I start conversing with one or just befriend one. You never know. That's how things happen. And I did that for years at Westlake, a couple of years till around 89, a little over 2 years. In May of 88, Billy Idol was started to track his album, The Charmed Life CD. In May of 88 was when they were trying out a new studio, and my buddy Dave was telling me, he said, hey man, it looks like they're going to hire me to be the engineer to track Billy's new album. I'm like, cool. And of course, me, since we're, like brothers, I was like, hey, do you think they'll let me hang out? And he goes, well, I don't know, I'll ask him. I'm like, okay, cool. So I let it be, let him just, take time to hear back. And like a week later, he goes, yeah, I heard from Billy and Keith. He said, you're cool. You're welcome to hang out when we try out the studio, session next week or whenever that was, back in May of 88. Billy liked the studio, and so they took roots there to start tracking for his, Charmed Life album. And since they let me hang out there as a guest, so I was like a fly on a wall, hanging out every day in the control room, literally inches behind their shoulders, right behind the console, and studying Keith's production techniques. For example, Billy Idol didn't have much material. I think he only had like a couple song ideas at best. So he would take like a 4-bar idea and play it for Keith, either on a cassette or on acoustic guitar, right, face to face. And then Keith Forsey, the producer, was responsible for taking just that 4-bar lick and transposing it into like a whole 20-piece arrangement, music arrangement, 20 sections or whatever. That's what I was learning. I was like, that was one example how I learned about music arranging. I just watched how Billy would give Keith a simple idea, just 4 bars, couple chords, and then Keith would take that and have to do variations, quote unquote, to break it down into what looks like an arrangement, to build a song on from. Once you have a foundation, then you can do variations, and that's one of the great things I learned, because me being a producer, even though I was in Jersey and had all this stuff, I was still very green, and what the hell do I know other than listening to records? I'm just a fan listening that enjoys it, but I never had no formal training, anything like that. I didn't take music lessons. I hated the idea of music lessons. I actually did take one for drumming, and with the snare book John Tonelli wanted to teach me to do. He goes, there's a left, right, left, right. I'm like, what the hell's this? And I put in the Cream album. This is what I want to play. I don't go like I'm in a parade. See, anyway, that was the end of lessons. I said, oh, forget it. I'll figure it out. I'll just figure it out on my own. I was only limited with my music knowledge. And then finally watching the big picture, how a producer takes just a song idea and then does the hammer and banging of it into variations, which make arrangements, sections for a song. And that's what I was doing for about a year, just hanging out like a fly on the wall, watching this and soaking up knowledge. I learned, I didn't realize how much I didn't know. It was like, a chance of a lifetime, for like, let's say you wanted to be a magician all your life, and you finally get your chance to hang out with Houdini backstage, and the master's showing you how the trick is done. And that's how I started developing my musical education for dynamics and song arrangements and variations, watching a professional do it, who was kind enough to let me sit behind his shoulders, read his notes when he'd take a break, and go down his legal pad of notes and read it. I'm used to, 7 or 8 sections in an arrangement when I used to work with my partner in Jersey. This guy's got like 20 pieces, like, holy shit. But I'm understanding now how he's doing it. So I did that. I'm soaking up knowledge, my production knowledge. I'm learning music theory. My weak points, I'm learning.
So Billy Idol came in with an idea or a fragment of a song, and then Keith Forsey sat down and essentially wrote the song.
He did the arrangement, and then Billy would just do the lyrics where lyrics were needed to be composed.
But didn't Keith actually have to write the song? Because if Billy comes in with 4 bars...
Yeah, I think I know Keith Forsey got writing. He's a writer himself. He wrote one hit that's on rotation in this day, like by Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me. Everybody knows that song from The Breakfast Club, Don't You Forget About Me.
Great song.
Great, and that's one of my favorites. But that's him. The guy's got talent. Not only can he write, but he knows how to produce it, arrange it. But yeah, he would, I don't know, I can't remember. I'm sure he shared writing credits. I don't know how he worked out with Billy or points on a record or whatever. That's between them. There's different ways you can work it, but I'm sure you might see his name, as part of getting writing credits. But yeah, all that stuff, that's him. He's the guy. That's not Billy. But the audience thinks, oh, Idol's so talented. That's the way producers work. That's a producer's job. For example, here's a perfect example. I couldn't believe it when I started, becoming hip to how the business works, which was kind of making me sad. I thought it was about music. Once you become a star, you have the freedom and liberty to do your music, because that's music, not prefabricated, stuff you expect. So here's the example. Billy brought in a demo he did on his home studio, multi-track. He brought his cassette in. It was just drum machine and bass guitar. He played himself, and a guitar thing he played, overdubbed, and the vocal. And he brings the tape in, and it's a great sound and song, a great rockin' song. It had essence to it, just that rawness, but it had the soul. And so I remember he finally played it for Keith. I remember this. Billy comes in, we were taking a break in the back, and he goes, yeah, I played it for Keith, and he's not feeling it, or he said, yeah, he's not liking it or something like that. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's great. I think you should put that demo on the album just the way it is. I mean, that's rock and roll. Come on. and then I finally got the moment, to actually talk to Keith Forsey face to face when the opportunity came, where it was like a Friday night party, everybody's relaxed, and I finally had the chance to approach him. So I approached him. He's all loose and feeling good and stuff from partying, and I feel okay and brave. And I walk up. I'm like, Keith, man, why don't you put that song on the album just the way it is? And he goes, no, it's not Idol. It's not Idol. Not Idol? That is, duh. That's not what he meant. What he meant was that's not Idol, the image.
Right.
It's his job, the producer, to do the image.
The brand, because it's a business.
Business. That's why they call it music business.
Lou, did the song that Billy wrote, did it make its way onto the album as a track?
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah. I think it was Trouble with the Sweet Stuff. That could have been it, because there's on the published version on the CD, it like breaks down into halftime, and the demo is just straight forward beat, boom pop, boom pop, boom pop.
Yeah.
And Billy's playing a rhythm guitar right in it, and it's cool. It's got a good tempo. But I guess Keith Forsey didn't see it as Billy Idol, quote unquote. So getting back to your point, and to tell all your listeners, that's the way it goes in the music business. It's not just because you're an artist, you do it, and then they accommodate to all your ideas. It's, if you have the ideas, a lot of that work is, the producer. And I give credit to Dave, the engineer, because he was a great engineer. I learned a lot about him technically. He was like a minimalist, and he got great sounding drums the way he tracked them with simple Shure 57 mics on everything. I couldn't believe it. Minimal EQing and just a little bit of compression. You put the, mic the kit up, a couple overheads, kick, snare, toms, blah, blah. And, I'm like, Dave, how'd you do it? He goes, not much. Cause when we took a break, I'm like, how are you getting that great sound? He explained it to me. So again, I'm learning firsthand from a guy that's engineered, did track Billy's previous couple albums. He also did Whiplash Smile, and he worked on Rebel Yell. So he and Billy and Keith have a history, as a team, engineer, producer, artist team going back years. So I was very fortunate to be there. And at the time, I wasn't a Billy Idol fan at all. I really didn't care about him. I thought he was like a B rock star at best, but I never listened to him. And ironically, when my partner and I just met, started hanging out, he tried to turn me on to Billy Idol's first record. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's cool, whatever. He actually liked Billy Idol. So that's what's like pretty just blowing my mind. It's like, wait a minute. Looking at the karmic picture and the way destiny and the way things work, fusion, past, present, and future all together, is like mind-boggling how destiny can work sometimes. It's like
Lou, do you have any personal reflections about your interactions with Billy Idol?
Yeah, he was good to me at the beginning. We met really great. Our first introduction was before he did the album, going back to, it was November of '87. Dave invited me to a Giorgio studio. He said, hey, you want to come hang out? Billy's coming in to do some overdubs for a radio promo. I'm like, yeah, sure I do. That was my first time. Actually, I had a chance to be there with him. So I go over there, hang out, and Billy had to come in and there was a song, Hot in the City, where the music takes a break, and on a record he shouts out, New York! So for the radio promo, he had to take that same song and mute New York, and then dub in, Oklahoma, LA, Ohio, for radio stations, across the country. And that's what he was coming in to do. So I'm just, we're waiting. This is me and Dave, and Billy's late. And I decided to twist a joint. What the hell? And Dave's cool. We used to smoke weed all the time. So I'm just twisting a joint there in the control room. And all of a sudden, the big control door gets kicked open. Bang. And here comes Billy right there with all these chains hanging down, his leather jacket. He's got this huge joint the size of a cigar, half smoked. He looks over to his right, turns to me and sees me twisting a joint. He takes his joint out of his mouth, hands it over to me, and says, here, try this. And that's how we met. And so then, Billy and Keith went on to do their overdubbings for a few hours. And then since I knew Keith Forsey used Giorgio's studio, I'd see him there all the time, hanging out. And I'm hanging out, Keith's doing work. And that's how I got to befriend Keith, so he got to know me. He asked what Billy was like. Yeah, he was cool. The first meeting, I'd say we got off to a good start. And then fast forward, I think the next time I saw him was when it finally came out to the first day they were trying out the studio. I think it was called Track Records on Vineland in North Hollywood, which is right down the street from Giorgio's studio. But anywho, they tried the studio. After they said it's cool for me to hang out, they had the live band. They were just rocking, playing, feeling the vibe, getting loose, just testing the waters of the studio, see if it was cool to do the album there. At the end of the day, as we're leaving, he goes, next time here we're together, I'll bring the pot. Next time we're partners in crime. I'm like, cool. Okay, you got it, champ. Yeah, cool.
The reason why I asked that is because I'm trying to figure out if he was smoking weed and stoned, what exactly was his role in the studio at that point?
Well, he was there. They were trying out songs with the live band, feeling the vibe of the room, the sound of the room. I guess, it's between him and the engineer and Keith, the producer.
Okay.
They're filling out the studio, seeing is this where we want to do the album? Because we're going to be, we're looking for a home for the next year. We're going to be committed. Is this where you want to stay? So, they were trying it out. It's that kind of a thing,
Okay.
And so I guess they were just playing music and just feeling the vibe. They weren't getting to business and recording, songs. I think they were just, filling out, the room, how it felt to rehearse in there, and how it sounded and stuff. And that's where they settled in to do the whole album. Every Friday night they decided to have a party. They would record Monday through Friday and end early Friday afternoon and then have a party. And his handler, Art Natoli, would be the guy to go get all the groupies and bring up the chicks to bring them over. He was like Billy's handler. Anyway, but Art, we're partying there and getting loose and stuff, and everybody's having a good time. And I start talking to one of the girls, and there's like maybe a couple dozen. Because, I'll be honest, that was another reason for getting in the music business was meeting chicks. Who's going to say, no, I just wanted to be a musician? Oh, bullshit. You want to meet the chicks too? Come on. Be honest. We know it. I'm telling you, that's true. That was half the motivation. In L.A., the babes go, come on. The point is, I'm just talking to one girl, just being social, and Billy's talking to chicks and whatever, and everybody's doing their thing. And then Art comes from out of nowhere, and he goes, Luch, stay away from the chicks. They're for Billy. And I'm like, okay, sorry. And then Art goes away, and I'm thinking, what the fuck? Dude, you got to be kidding me. I'm partying with you guys with all these chicks here, and everybody's loose, having a great time, feeling good and everything. And now I can't talk to the chicks. It's like, what the hell is good's a party then?
It's not like the ladies were going to confuse you with Billy Idol, right? They knew who Billy Idol was.
Exactly, and there's like lots of them. Those are like what his girlfriend I'm hitting on. There's like lots of them, like at least a dozen. That was his job, getting the chicks. That's what handlers do. Oh, well, okay, whatever, because I really wanted to learn as much as I could. And how often you get a chance to learn from producers and, pop stars, rock stars that are actually doing it. You don't get many opportunities to do that. Eventually, I started seeing a real side of Billy. I'll just answer one more thing. The way they would treat girls, like innocent girls that were hanging out, was just uncalled for, unacceptable. It was brutal. For example, behind the studio, there was this nice woman, probably in her young 30s, like the spring dress type, long blonde hair, pretty girl, innocent type. She lived right behind the studio, and she would see us hanging out all the time. And then Keith Forsey started talking to her, and he invited her over to the party one night. And she comes over all dressed up in a nice spring dress, like she's going on a nice date. She's all happy. Well, a producer invited her over. She's thinking like she's the only girl that this producer talks to, real innocent girl. And he just starts being rude to her. And I won't get into the details, but, he's just asking her to do things, what you don't do, when you're talking to normal women, you just, unless they're groupie sluts. Once they did that, they kicked her out. They asked her to leave. I'm saying to myself, dude, Keith, what are you doing? You're breaking her heart. Man, I just felt so bad for her. I guess that was her introduction to the music business. That's what they're like. It's not so happy roses there. They're not, it's when you see their dark side, it's not so cool. But at the same time, it's like, well, I'm just here to learn music. I don't participate in that. I don't do it, but I just want to learn. And if I can use these contacts with my partner, music, and I can produce it, and that's great.
What happened, Lou, with your friend? The last time we spoke, you said that you guys had a falling out. So he betrayed you, right? So what happened?
Oh, big time. Everything's going great. And so it was spring 1990. He was having a falling out with his wife. And I said, dude, come on out, stay with me. Come on out here to my place in North Hollywood. Let's work on some demos. I'm right here in the circles of Keith Forrest and Billy Idol and Dave Concourse and everybody. Let's do some demos, and we might make something happen because I know these guys. Long story short, Keith takes a Greyhound bus out to L.A. I pick him up at the bus station, and I'm literally supporting him 100%. I'm letting him stay at my tiny little garage apartment, and I had a little studio with a Tascam 8-track cassette recorder, a couple of mics, and some outboard gear, a drum machine, and all we needed to keep making our demos. We're not making, CD masters here. We just need demos, and I've got everything we need. I've got all the great stuff to do the demos. One time after I got a bunch of demos, I had the chance to bring them over finally to meet Billy and Keith Forsey. And he just walks in like he's Jesus or something with his chest out, not saying a word, expecting everybody to serve him by his body language. And I'm just flipped out. I'm like, I can't believe he's doing this. We're right here with Keith Forsey. You don't get much bigger than that, dude. So long story short, he didn't make a very good impression with Keith Forsey and Billy. And unfortunately, shit rolls downhill, and that's going to make me look bad because I'm the one that brought him in here. I'm like, all this respect I'm getting from these guys now makes me look like a turd. Thanks, dude. And I even had Keith Forsey's respect when I played him my cassette demo a year prior, a couple years before that. He actually couldn't believe my home 8-track recordings were on 8-track. He swore I did them in a 24-track studio. I said, no, Keith, I appreciate it, but no, that's just 8 tracks. I just know what I'm doing. I know how to, multi-track. I know how to bounce tracks together and submix and all that stuff. That's why I'm here. I think I'm pretty good, but you're the judge. You just complimented me. That was the end of my reputation with them. So I still stayed with my partner, and then he taught his girlfriend how to play bass. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, this has become like a Yoko thing. Where did she come from, dude? This is just you and me. Now we got this Pay Yoko, Linda McCartney thing. What the? They're lovers. They're like, oh, love you. You can't separate them. Forget it. Forget it. He's hooked. Forget it. And then, long story short, I bought us some band instruments to, if you want to be taken serious with the record companies, you got to be playing live. I didn't want to be a drummer, but I know how to play drums. So let's rehearse and play at some clubs. What the hell? I don't care. So I bought the instruments for us to start rehearsing as a trio, him on guitar, her on bass, and I'm playing drums. And the son of a gun pawned all the instruments, and that was the last straw. I'm like, forget it. Dude, first of all, you're here with Yoko, and now you sold everything that I put out my own money for. I could have used that to buy food or whatever. Ended up going to Van Nuys Courthouse, small claims, just to sue him, just small claims because I had the receipts. And fortunately, by fate, People's Court's producers get their shows from reviewing small claim cases. They read what the plaintiff said, and if they look controversial or dramatic, quote unquote, then they call up the plaintiff first and ask them, say, hey, they're from People's Court. We saw your case. It looks very controversial and great for People's Court. We'd like to have it on our show. I'm like, okay. The producers called him and they got back and they said, yeah, the defendant agreed. You can have it on People's Court. Wow, national TV, huh? Okay. So long story short.
And you won.
Yeah, I won. 9 minutes flat after it was edited because I know from being there was a lot more stuff that went on, but I know that they edited it out. But yeah, the edited show was 9 minutes. I won in full. Judge Wapner said it was about credibility. He didn't believe a word my partner was saying because, I'll give you the link so your viewers can watch it. It's entertaining if you guys want to see what it's like, really.
Actually, I have the video, Lou. What I'll do is I'll just tack it on to the end of the show.
Yeah, you can see what happened. So that was the final straw, heartbreaking. It was like, Cain and Abel. Like, dude, we're brothers. So that was the end of that.
You actually continued to stay in the music industry up through 2006, correct?
Correct. I still worked in studios as a technical engineer, setting up the tape machines. I didn't really care about producing music because I had no music to produce, no one to work with.
But you ended up with Sony?
Eventually, yeah. I stayed in Hollywood and worked at Westlake Audio, and then after that, what did I do? I worked for another guy, Sylvester LeVay, who did B-movie and TV show soundtracks. I worked as his personal assistant at his home studio. And after that falling out, I just wanted to get away from Hollywood, just get the hell out of there. I was like, I'm done. I was so close to making it, and you just do that. So I went back to New York, just went to my mom's apartment, took care of her, and I just got a job at a studio there for a year at Unique Recording Studios. And then I decided to move back after a year, saved up some money, and then went back. So this was in 91. I was in a studio at Unique for a year in 1991, for exactly 1 year. And then I moved back and to Woodland Hills. I moved in with some buddies of mine who we became roommates with. And that was a house in Woodland Hills in 1992. And lo and behold, I'm doing the same thing, knocking on studios again, trying to just, start from scratch one again. And fortunately, I got hired at Larrabee Studios, which, getting back to how karma and fate work, it used to be Giorgio Moroder's old studio that he sold, the first studio that gave me my break. So it's now Larrabee North. And fortunately, I knock on that place, like, yeah, I know that place. Let me go knock on it, because I know the place. I used to hang out here. And fortunately, the guy that answered was the head tech, Bruce Millett, real nice English guy, studio designer. He interviewed me, liked my resume, and hired me. It's just weird. I'm having deja vu. Wow, I'm back at the same building, the same little building again. This is wild. So I stayed in the business as a technician, no musical ambitions other than just recording at home for my entertainment. So I just got hired at Larrabee for a couple of years, setups as a technical engineer for all the clients. Michael Jackson was working there too. He was one of their clients, as well as Prince, a few rappers. Snoop Dogg was there at Larrabee. I saw him, met him in a parking lot once before he made it, I guess when he was still recording with. So I did that for a couple of years. Kind of was getting a little disappointed. It's like I didn't come out here for this at all. I had no family. My plans that I wanted to do all kind of, went crash and burn. So I finally, after I had enough, I worked at Larrabee for a couple of years and then packed up and moved back to New York again and went back to Unique Recording Studio. Got hired there for a couple of years as a technician. And then I had ambitions to want to, work in a bigger studio. And then I got hired at Right Track, right around the corner in New York, a big studio. I worked there for about 6 months until I blew a tape machine up one day. Lesson well learned. It's like I didn't know that the new Studers are not like old Studers, because the new Studers have microprocessors and you have to turn the machines off before you plug in sync and control cables, Louis. Well, I didn't know that. I figured old Studers, you can do that, not the new Studers. So I learned the hard way and plugged all these cables in without turning the machine off and blew out the microprocessor, which canceled a very important session. And the owner wasn't very happy because I just cost him probably thousands of dollars. So, that job didn't last. But then I got worked in the Cabaret show as a sound man just to do something. And that was a lot of fun down in the Village. Next summer, I called Sony, like it was in 1988, August of 88. I just called Sony Studios, just looking for work in studios. And fortunately, the receptionist, instead of transferring me to human resources, she transferred me right down to the shop, the engineering shop. So I spoke to the head guy. His name's John Williams. I said, "Hi, I'm Lou Calabrese. They transferred me here to the shop, but that's cool." I said, "I'm just, I just explained to myself and my experience. I'm a setup engineer. I'm looking for work." And he goes, "Yeah, we're doing some projects. Come on in for an interview." So fortunately, I went in for an interview. He hired me just for a temporary gig, just to rewire one of the rooms. It was just supposed to be for a few weeks, whatever. But fortunately, they liked the way I worked. And then they had another project. They were doing another room, had to renovate, rip out the old gear and put in all new gear with all the wires and stuff. So, and I was at Sony then. That was my final job in the studio until 2006. But yeah, my last 8 years, I worked at Sony as a setup technician, setting up the machines, calibrating Pro Tools for the sessions when Pro Tools were finally making their way on the scene. So, and at the same time, Sony, was about to close. There was rumors going around that it was going bankrupt. They were going to close it, sell the building. That was it. They gave me some severance pay, a few $1,000. And that was the end of my days in studios. That was in 2006.
It's a tough business. I mean, you know that, I know that. So what advice do you have for young musicians and people who want to get into the music industry? What should they be aware of? What should they know?
Oh, golly, it's totally different, monster now, totally different beast since my days. It was like, geez, looking back, I had it easy back then compared to today. So, but I would say be true to yourself. Do only what you enjoy doing. Don't let anybody force you to do stuff that you're not comfortable with doing or you don't enjoy doing. Don't be forced to do anything. Just follow your heart, what you want to do. Things might look, rosy on the surface, but once you get into it, they're not so rosy. I'm not saying everything's like that, but it's just don't go in with expectations like, oh, I got to do is this, and that. You're going to get a good lesson in human behavior. That's one thing about the music business it taught me. You'd be surprised the way the nature of people are, the way they are. Not everyone, there's a lot of great people in it, but just be yourself, I would say, to tell people, follow your dreams and learn what you can on your own. Do it how you think you should do things. Because that's how I started, and I stuck to that code, and it got me the respect of a great producer. He really complimented me on my home cassettes. I'm like, well, that was a big compliment, and I was just doing it from the heart. And even he told me, his advice was the same thing. I asked him, and he said the same thing. Don't listen to anybody. Follow your heart. Do what you enjoy doing. Don't compromise. Don't sell your soul. Don't try to be somebody else. Even if you don't fit in with, everybody in the same room, you're not the same personality, then, if you don't feel comfortable, don't change. Don't sell yourself. Don't bend backwards, and don't kiss anybody's butt, because it's true. Nobody respects an ass kisser. I don't mean to speak bluntly, but it's true. If you really want respect for somebody admirable, don't kiss up to them. You can get their respect in other ways, but don't be a butt kisser, so to speak. That's what I would say, because the last thing you got is your soul. Once you compromise and sell that, your integrity, well, what else have you got? If you can't respect yourself, who else is going to respect yourself? But, do what makes you happy. Go with your instincts, I would tell them. If you enjoy it, do it. Because that's how I started. I just did it because I enjoyed it. I loved listening to the Beatles. They got me hooked musically in the deep end, so to speak, where I literally wanted to become part of the music. It wasn't enough just to play drums. I'm like, I want to become immersed. I want to become, morphed with the music. I want to be into it. I want to, whatever that is, those vibrations, I want to feel it, what music is. It's actual vibrations you can feel. Just do what makes you happy, because life is short. Live long enough. If you're fortunate enough, you'll find out that money's not everything. It's not happiness. I wanted to make money and get a hit because at the time I wanted to buy my grandmother and my mom new homes or new apartments, because my poor grandmother, rest her soul, she lived in a real horrible ghetto apartment in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Terrible place. And that was the main reason. That was my main half my motivation was I want to have a hit record, not for me to buy a big house, but to buy a big apartment for grandma so she could live like a human being for once. And the same thing with my mother. I wanted to get, at least set her up in an apartment with, nice aides and stuff and attendants or a nurse, whatever, so she could live like a human being. So that was my motivation for wanting to make money. And I was telling all my friends at the time, geez, $1 million is just one hit song away. All you got to do is write it. It can't be that hard.
Your advice to folks is great. To be true to yourself, those are great words.
That's the bottom line. One last thing I want to tell the audience, hey, I really do have a lot of experience. If anybody's out there that is doing music and they need any advice or opinions about their music or how to develop it, what state it's in, how to take it further, I'd be more than happy to give my opinion or guidance. So I do have a pretty good ear about music, arranging that is, and it can include my email address in it if they want to. I'm just saying I've had a lot of experience. I've been around a lot.
Yeah, not a problem. We'll add your email in the description box. So, folks, if you are a musician and a songwriter and you're looking for somebody to help you with some tips on engineering or producing, get in touch with Lou. So, Lou, I want to thank you again for coming on and talking about your experiences in the music
Sure.
industry. It's greatly appreciated. If you just hang on for a moment, what I'll do is I'll hit the recorder and I'll just chat with you for a minute.
Okay, I'll hold.
People's Court, case number 4740, Calabrese versus Dennis and Woodleaf for $2,500. All rise, please.
You may be seated. I know you've all been sworn. I've read your complaint, sir. You claim the defendants took some of your personal property, won't return it?
Yes, we agreed for fun to rehearse at his house with my instruments for recreation back in New Jersey. And since then, both of them agreed to move out, and I was moving out also, and they agreed to deliver my property as long as I paid them for the trailer hitch. They were driving out. Come January, I visited them and noticed that my equipment was at their house, and we discussed to get together again and
How
start
many
rehearsing.
guitars were there?
It was 1 guitar and 2 amplifiers.
2 amp. Okay. Go ahead.
And so several days passed, and I told them that I had an opportunity to rent the amplifiers out to make some money. And they told me that they moved the equipment because their landlord wanted to re-wax the floors. So being kind of suspicious, it didn't make sense why they would move the amplifiers, they told me, over to Paige's mother's house. And I said, why would you take it to her mother's house instead of just giving it back to me? And they said, oh, dude, well, we were in a rush when you had to get to work, blah, blah, blah. Everything starts
And
with
what they call you,
dude?
dude?
Yeah, that's how he speaks. Ah, dude. So I said, told him I had a chance to rent these amplifiers out, and he said, okay, we'll get them back from her mom's house, come time of the session. So the day of the session, I go to his house.
What was the day of the session?
It was like the first week of February. I don't know the exact day. So come time for me to go to his house, pick my property up, it's not there. So I said I had a chance to rent it out and make, some good income. And he said, sorry, what we actually did was we pawned it, and we didn't want to tell you because we were short of cash. And incidentally, I said, what gives you the right to pawn my property, even if we're short of cash? And right before, in January, he was short of cash and asked me if I would loan him some money, which I did.
How much did you loan him?
$250.
What form did it? Was it cash or by check?
Yeah, cash. It was actually, cash. And so he paid me with a check, which later bounced.
Let me see the check.
And I asked him for it. And he said, oh, we don't owe you nothing. And so I went to my accountant and got a copy of it. And I also have a letter
Not
here.
present again.
It was passed through twice, bounced 2 times, and I was charged a fee for that.
Did he loan you $250?
He gave me $250.
Why did you give him a check for $250?
Well, he was insisting that he was going to...
Oh, come on now. If you don't owe the money, if he gave you $250, you don't have to give it back. Why did you give him a charge to write out a check?
I gave him a check because he insisted that I write a check. I told him I didn't have any money in that bank account whatsoever.
But did you owe him $250?
No.
Yes, he did, Your Honor.
What was it for?
I didn't have any agreement with him.
You didn't have any agreement with him?
I didn't have any...
Did you get $250 in cash from him?
Yes, I did.
Why would he give you a gift of that?
Because we worked together for 10 years.
Did
He
you
was
have
the
his-
only one that made
Did
any
you have
money.
his guitar and 2 amplifiers?
He gave that to Paige and I as a gift back in October.
I never
He
gave
put
it
it
to
in
him.
our car in New York City. It stayed at my mother and father's house. Okay, it was our equipment. We
Why
filled
would
in
he
the
give?
warranty
What was the equipment
cards.
worth?
It's either $12.99 or $13.99 because he
I
took
have
the
the
receipt
receipt.
last time he was at the house. He took the receipt back.
This is the receipt when I bought it, and these are the receipts when he pawned it.
They were his originally.
He bought them in New York City
Why would he give them to you?
because we had worked together for years, and he had made all the money because he owned the studio.
We never made
equipment.
any money, Your Honor.
And I'm the one that never made any money.
He never even had a job for
Do you
3
pawn
years.
the stuff?
It was our equipment. We were under the...
I said you pawned
Yes,
it.
I did. Yes, I did.
Because you felt it was yours.
Yes, because it was a gift.
When he gave you the gift, who was present?
I was present, Your Honor. He
Were they
bought
in
it.
the-
What is your relationship to him?
I'm his girlfriend. He bought us the
How long you been his
equipment.
girlfriend?
2 years, June 1st.
Were you there when he
Yes,
said
it was
this,
at Sam
this
Ash.
is a gift?
Yes, he bought it for us. He was telling us he was going to buy it for us
Why would I
a
buy
month
him
before he even bought it, saying that we were going to be in a band and he was going to buy us the equipment that we needed. And he bought himself a drum kit, which we drove out here with our equipment, which if we didn't, when we got here, we took the drum kit over to his house and kept our equipment. My sister is a witness she spoke to Lucci when he was at Keith's mother's house in New Jersey.
Is this your sister?
This is Cindy. She's
Step forward.
Yeah, I called my sister when she was in New Jersey to talk to her, and she goes, "Oh, Cindy, Lucci's here, and he knows you're on the phone. Do you want to talk to him?" And I go, "Well, okay." So he gets on the phone, and he starts telling me how he bought all this equipment, that it was coming out here, he was going to get a band, do I want to move in with them, and all this other stuff. And he told me that he bought the equipment and everything so that they could have the equipment. He told me that.
Did you tell her that?
Absolutely not. And here is a letter.
How do you get the $2,500, sir? You got $13.99
Right
for
here,
the
Your Honor.
equipment and $250 for that check. Where do you get
$13.99 for the 2 amps and 1 guitar, $260 for the bad check, and I was also charged a $10 return fee, which is right here in my statement.
All right.
$800 for loss of wages.
What's the loss of wages?
That's this letter right here. When I was under the impression that he was going to get the property back from his mother's house, I had a verbal agreement with his associate that I had a chance to rent him the 2 amplifiers for recording session. And since I turned up at the session empty-handed, I was put on a bad spot, as well as that person I had the agreement with.
This is a question of credibility.
We got this.
Sir,
Yes, okay.
what else do you want to show me?
Your Honor, I'm also suing for court costs. That's an additional $58.
Court costs are always awarded to the party who wins.
He's
What?
been famous for doing this in the past when he worked with me as a producer.
He sued you in the past?
No, but he was famous for, like, sending in copyrights, sending in checks that didn't even have an account.
How about you're giving him a check where it would bounce twice?
I tried to get the money into the bank to cover that check. However...
You haven't
I
satisfactorily
waited
answered
2
the
months,
question.
Your Honor.
Why don't you please be quiet, sir? You haven't satisfactorily answered the question as to why you would write a check for $250 when you didn't owe him a dime.
Well, because I felt like he acted like as if that I should give him something in return.
Return for what?
Okay, I don't know.
That's
Right.
that's the point, sir. And I don't believe you. Just to be as
I
blunt,
did-
sir. That's case is finished. Heard all the evidence I'm going to hear. To be perfectly blunt, I don't believe you, and that's what this case turns on. It turns on credibility. And I don't believe you, sir, because I don't. When you get $250 and write a check that bounces, you're repaying him for the $250, and you're telling me that was a gift. So I don't believe the other was a gift either. I believe you took his property and you pawned it. Judgment is for plaintiff for $2,459.99.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Doug Llewellyn talks to the plaintiff and the defendants about Judge Wapner's decision right after these messages.
Ross presents...
We'll be back for the litigants' reactions to Judge Wapner's decision right after these messages.
Barbara Boxer bouncing one.
Based on credibility, Judge Wapner finds for the plaintiff in this case, Keith Dennis, one of the defendants, just going to keep. How do you feel about that? The judge was pretty blunt. He didn't believe you at all.
I understand that. There's extenuating circumstances around that check that I don't want to talk about in court.
Why not? It might have helped your case.
No, it wouldn't help my case.
Make it worse, huh?
It could go either way.
Okay.
Because I don't have too many written agreements between him and myself, okay? And what I do have, I couldn't get a hold of in time to appear here today.
Well, how's your musical career going?
Well, I gave it up. I gave it up, yes. I've got a career job now at the bank, so I don't need to work in music. I don't need to wonder where the money's coming from.
Thank you very much. Officer Brell is waiting for you to sign a few documents. Now the plaintiff is on his way out of the courtroom. You feel better now?
Sure.
I mean, these were friends, right? Good friends.
Friends for 12 years. He always pulled little lies in the past that I was willing to overlook until it got to this where it was so ridiculous and unnatural. I just had to do something about it. You know, how many times can you forgive a friend and be slapped in the face and, look the other way? I only have so much face left, and I got to say what I got.
Okay. How's your musical career going? You still trying?
Sure, as a hobby, yeah.
Just as a hobby. All right, well, thank you very much. Congratulations. Officer Brell has a few documents for you to sign. Thank you.
Translation by telepathy into a state of consciousness. Love is fixed for truth as it battles the struggle for life. Exploring sensation under amazing constellation, captivated by an eclipse. our imaginations take a long flight. Together we share the mystery. We long to caress in heights of ecstasy. A natural progression. Come on and give in to this feeling. These days, everywhere I look, things are in a craze. All I see are helicopters looking down at me. I hear the sound of bombs from all around on the TVs. Lift yourself to a new reality. If you want to find truth, then you want to be free, cause you can't escape the heat as the globe's warming while your body's burning calories. You're my begs to be released. You're my begs to be released. Should materialize before their eyes can prove future time to enlighten minds. Physically manifest to divine body, soul, and mind. Intertwine to bring the divine once again to mankind. And if you didn't think I was coming back for you, you were wrong. 'Cause I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming right for you. I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming inside. I'm coming, my energy invites you. I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming to you. I don't like what I feel. Could you please, could somebody please help me change things? Change it from within, from within. So twisted, thinking, created. You can't escape, so jaded, self-destructive.